My parents cut me out of my sister's wedding, calling me a troublemaker. I still remember the sharp clink of ice in my father's glass as he mocked me across the mahogany dining table, declaring, "You will never have a happy marriage." He genuinely believed those words. He believed I was destined for isolation, a permanent footnote to his manufactured legacy. 4 weeks later, a premier business magazine hit newsstands across the country. The front cover featured a high-definition photograph of my wedding. I was not standing alone. I was standing hand in hand with Nathaniel Cross, a global tech billionaire and the exact man my father was currently begging for a massive corporate bailout. My phone sat on my soil-stained workbench, vibrating heavily against the wood. The screen flashed relentlessly, logging exactly 84 missed calls from my father, my mother, and my sister in the span of 30 minutes. The arrogant sneers they wore a month ago had completely evaporated, replaced by absolute, unadulterated panic. They realized the troublemaker they discarded was now holding the absolute authority to crush their entire empire. If you have ever been treated like the family scapegoat, comment below where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button for a story about absolute payback. 4 weeks prior, the atmosphere inside my parents' formal dining room felt like a pressurized cabin moments before a catastrophic blowout. The heavy brass pendulum of the antique grandfather clock swung in the corner, marking the time with a rhythmic, suffocating tick. I sat near the foot of the long mahogany table, keeping my hands resting quietly on my lap. The scent of roasted lamb mixed heavily with the overpowering floral perfume my mother, Sylvia, wore like a protective shield. Across from me sat my younger sister, Clara. She did not bother pretending to engage in the meal. She held her smartphone inches from her face, scrolling rapidly with an acrylic nail. Beside her sat Bradley, her fiancé. Bradley wore a bespoke charcoal suit that strained slightly across his shoulders, projecting the unearned confidence of a man coasting entirely on inherited corporate wealth. He took a slow sip of his red wine, his eyes darting toward me with a familiar, predatory amusement. At the head of the table sat Warren. My father gripped a heavy crystal tumbler filled with expensive, dark amber bourbon. He swirled the liquid methodically, the ice clinking a sharp, metallic warning against the glass. He had spent the last 30 minutes dissecting the logistical triumphs of the upcoming wedding, praising Clara for securing the most exclusive country club venue in the state. I did not interrupt their self-congratulatory parade. I simply observed the mechanics of their vanity. I am a botanical geneticist. I spend my days in humid research greenhouses, analyzing the cellular structure of drought-resistant crops. My hands frequently carry the faint, undeniable stain of rich soil beneath the fingernails. To my family, a dynasty built entirely on commercial real estate and country club optics, physical labor of any kind was an offensive disruption to their pristine aesthetic. Sylvia placed her silver fork onto her china plate with a deliberate, ringing clatter. She cleared her throat, adjusting the heavy diamond tennis bracelet sliding down her wrist. "Ivy, darling," Sylvia began, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that completely failed to mask her underlying malice. "Clara and Bradley have finalized the seating arrangements for the reception." I kept my gaze level, locking onto her shifting eyes. I did not offer a verbal prompt. Sylvia shifted uncomfortably under my silence. She reached across the table and placed her hand over Clara's, a manufactured display of maternal solidarity. "The guest list is exceedingly tight. Bradley's family is flying in dozens of high-level corporate stakeholders. Every single seat represents a crucial networking opportunity for his commercial real estate firm." Clara dropped her phone onto the table. She crossed her arms, leaning forward with a defiant jut of her chin. "What Mother is trying to say," Clara interrupted, rolling her eyes extravagantly, "is that you are not on the list?" The words hung in the stale, perfumed air. "We removed your RSVP," Clara continued, a cruel smirk tugging at the corners of her glossed lips. "It is a black tie gala, Ivy. You do not even own a dress that costs more than $200. You would stick out like a sore thumb among Bradley's investors. Besides, you do not have a +1. We simply cannot have a miserable, single woman dragging down the energy at the head table. Bradley chuckled, a low, guttural sound of pure condescension. He adjusted his silk tie, leaning back in his chair. Do not take it personally, Ivy. High society networking requires a certain level of conversational polish. We cannot risk you boring a multimillionaire developer with lectures about plant genetics and dirt. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or defend the complexity of my work. I felt the steady, rhythmic beating of my own heart, grounding me against their synchronized psychological assault. They believed they were humiliating a simple gardener. They had absolutely no idea that the proprietary agricultural patents registered under my name were currently valued in the hundreds of millions. I shifted my gaze to Warren. The patriarch of the family stopped swirling his bourbon. He set the heavy crystal tumbler down on the mahogany wood. Bracing both of his hands against the edge of the table, he leaned his broad frame forward, invading the physical space of the room to establish absolute dominance. Let us drop the polite excuses, Warren barked, his voice a harsh, gravelly rumble that demanded immediate submission. You are not invited because you are a troublemaker, Ivy. You lack the fundamental pedigree required to exist in our circles. He lifted his right hand, extending a thick index finger and jabbing it aggressively through the air in my direction. You spend your days playing in the mud, Warren sneered, his upper lip curling in unvarnished disgust. You refuse to leverage the family name. You refuse to attend the country club mixers. You deliberately isolate yourself to punish us for your own glaring inadequacies. Sylvia dabbed the corner of her dry eye with a linen napkin, assuming the role of the tragic martyr. We tried to mold you, Ivy. We tried to give you a life of grace and elegance, but you stubbornly chose the gutter. Clara picked up her water glass, hiding a victorious grin behind the crystal rim. Warren picked his bourbon back up, his chest puffing outward as he prepared to deliver the final, killing blow. He stared directly into my eyes, stripping away decades of familial connection until nothing remained but cold, calculating judgment. You will never have a happy marriage, Warren declared, the syllables striking the silence like heavy stones. No man of true substance, no man of actual power or wealth, will ever tolerate a woman who refuses to submit to the natural hierarchy. You will spend the rest of your life completely alone, digging in the dirt, because you are entirely unlovable. The dining room plunged into a dead, suffocating quiet. Clara stopped grinning, holding her breath to watch my spirit break. Bradley sat perfectly still, waiting for the inevitable tears. Sylvia looked down at her plate, refusing to witness the emotional execution her husband had just performed. I looked at the four of them. I saw the fragile, crumbling foundation of their manufactured aristocracy. I saw the desperate, clawing need to diminish my existence simply to inflate their own hollow egos. I did not weep. I did not shout a single defense. I reached down and picked up the white linen napkin resting on my lap. I folded the fabric exactly in half, matching the corners with precise, deliberate movements. I folded it again into a perfect square. I placed the crisp linen directly beside my untouched china plate. I placed my hands on the armrests of my chair and pushed myself up to a standing position. The heavy wooden legs scraped sharply against the marble floor, the harsh sound cutting cleanly through the thick tension in the room. Warren frowned, his thick brows knitting together in sudden confusion. He expected a frantic, weeping meltdown. He expected me to beg for my seat at the table. My absolute, terrifying stillness short-circuited his entire psychological strategy. I turned my back on the patriarch. I did not issue a single threat. I did not offer a dramatic farewell. I walked with slow, measured steps toward the grand entryway of the estate. My practical leather boots struck the polished marble with a steady, unyielding cadence. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing their arrogant laughter inside. But they had no idea they had just locked themselves in a burning building. The humid air of my botanical research greenhouse usually offered sanctuary, but the following morning, the peace was violently ruptured. Condensation dripped down the slanted glass panes, catching the pale morning sunlight. I stood at my stainless steel workbench, my fingers dusted with dark peat moss, delicately separating the fragile root systems of a modified, drought-resistant hybrid. The scent of wet earth and crushed eucalyptus leaves hung heavy in the enclosed space, grounding me in the meticulous rhythm of my work. The harsh, metallic vibration of my cell phone buzzing against the metal table severed the quiet. I glanced at the illuminated screen. Clara's name flashed in bold black letters. I reached over, tapped the green acceptance icon with my knuckle to avoid transferring soil, and activated the speakerphone. "Send the authenticity certificates and the insurance binders for grandmother's emerald collar to my email right now," Clara commanded. She omitted any greeting. The background noise of her call echoed with the hushed, frantic rustle of high-end boutique assistants and clinking garment hangers. I did not stop my work. I picked up a specialized grafting scalpel, my hand perfectly steady. "The emerald collar is secured in my private deposit box at the downtown municipal bank," I stated, keeping my vocal register low and clinical. "You have no need for the insurance binders." Clara released a sharp, nasal sigh, projecting the supreme irritation of a monarch forced to explain simple concepts to a peasant. "Do not play obtuse, Ivy. It is exhausting. Dad utilized his executive privileges with the regional branch manager yesterday afternoon. He bypassed your security protocols and retrieved the jewelry. I am wearing the collar for the reception." The scalpel hovered a fraction of an inch above a fragile, green stem. I held my breath for exactly 3 seconds. The antique emerald collar did not belong to the communal family estate. My grandmother bypassed Warren entirely in her will, transferring the piece directly to me precisely because I was the only descendant who viewed the stones as familial history rather than a liquid asset to be pawned. Warren had contested the allocation for years, disgusted that an unpolished researcher possessed the most valuable heirloom in the lineage. His resentment festered, mutating from bitter complaints at holiday dinners into an active, aggressive sense of entitlement. He had not merely leveraged his country club influence, he had actively committed grand larceny. He manipulated a bank manager, likely dangling a commercial lease agreement as bait, to drill into a secure vault registered exclusively under my name. My exclusion from the wedding was a petty social maneuver. This was a severe, undeniable federal crime. "Bradley's primary investors expect to see generational wealth," Clara continued, her voice echoing through the damp greenhouse. "They need to see tangible legacy. The necklace provides the exact aesthetic weight we require to project stability. However, the jeweler refuses to resize the platinum clasp without the original appraisal documents verifying the stone's provenance. Forward the files. Ivy, I do not have time to hold your hand through this." I lowered the scalpel and placed it gently on a sterile cloth. I stared at the rich, dark loam packed beneath my fingernails. My family viewed my existence as a biological embarrassment, yet they viewed my assets as a communal slush fund. They actively despised the woman who labored in the dirt, but they felt absolute, unvarnished entitlement to the fruits of my quiet existence. They intended to parade my stolen inheritance under crystal chandeliers to manufacture an illusion of solvency for a collapsing commercial real estate firm. "The jeweler is waiting," Clara snapped, the sharp click of her acrylic nails tapping against a phone screen filtering through the speaker. "Stop throwing a silent tantrum and send the attachments." I wiped my hands on my thick canvas apron. I did not yell. I did not hurl accusations of theft across the digital connection. Panic is the weapon of the weak. Absolute control is the weapon of the architect. I turned my back on the potting station and walked toward the climate-controlled corner of my sanctuary. A matte black, heavily encrypted terminal sat on a reinforced steel desk. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across my face. I bypassed the standard user interfaces, navigating directly into the secure portal of my private holding firm, while my parents believed I barely scraped by on meager university grants. This terminal managed the billion-dollar yield of my proprietary agricultural patents. The antique emerald collar was a fraction of my net worth, independently insured for $450,000, but the monetary value meant nothing. The strategic value meant everything. Warren and Bradley were not simply planning to resize a necklace for a wedding reception. Men drowning in toxic commercial debt do not care about bridal aesthetics. They intended to use the verified appraisal documents to leverage the emeralds as collateral. They planned to secure a fast, high-interest shadow loan to cover Bradley's impending margin calls, using my stolen property as the anchor. I opened the asset management registry. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the keys clacking in rapid, rhythmic succession. I located the file containing the emerald collar's provenance, gemological grading reports, and underwriter guarantees. Ivy! Clara shrieked through the phone speaker across the room, her manufactured composure fracturing. I am losing my patience. Bradley is closing a massive deal this week. Do not ruin this for him. I ignored her shrill noise. I initiated a direct, irreversible legal freeze on the physical asset. I typed a specific command code, triggering a severe fraud alert protocol directly linked to the National Jewelry Registry and my private insurance underwriters. The digital command executed with a soft, definitive chime. The resulting effect was instantaneous and devastating. By legally flagging the item as compromised and suspending the authenticity certificates, I stripped the emeralds of their entire financial liquidity. The necklace transformed into a dead stone. The platinum could not be melted. The gems could not be extracted. No legitimate jeweler in the state would dare alter the piece, and absolutely no financial institution or shadow lender would accept it as collateral for a corporate loan. I effectively turned a $450,000 lifeline into a worthless, radioactive paperweight. Warren thought his banking influence made him an untouchable god. Clara thought her bridal status granted her supreme immunity. They boldly broke into my vault, completely failing to understand that I held the digital keys to the entire fortress. They stole a heavy chain, and I just welded it permanently to their ankles. I stepped away from the glowing terminal and walked back to my stainless steel workbench. The pale morning sunlight illuminated the vibrant green leaves of my research crops. I stood in the center of cultivating life, executing absolute financial death. Clara was still ranting, her voice pitching higher into a frantic, chaotic wail as the boutique staff presumably tried to placate her. She demanded obedience. She demanded submission. She demanded the documents that would allow her fraudulent husband to survive another fiscal quarter. I set my phone face down on the soil-covered workbench, letting her shrill demands echo into the void as I prepared to sever their lifeline entirely. The day of the wedding arrived with a suffocating barrage of perfectly curated, nauseating social media posts. My tablet rested on a stack of galvanized steel seed trays, the high-resolution screen illuminating the dim, humid morning air of my research facility. I tapped the glass, swiping past a relentless stream of high society pageantry. Clara stood at the center of the country club's grand foyer, draped in yards of imported white silk, posing for the hired photography team. Her neck remained entirely bare. The antique emerald collar was conspicuously absent, a silent, glaring testament to the absolute financial block I executed earlier in the week. Sylvia dominated the digital foreground. My mother clutched a strand of heavy South Sea pearls against her collarbone, tilting her head to project the aura of a benevolent, loving matriarch. Her caption dripped with manufactured grace, thanking her expansive network for celebrating the union of two preeminent families. Warren stood beside her, puffing his broad chest outward in a custom tuxedo. He gripped Bradley's shoulder with a firm, patriarchal approval. They manufactured a flawless visual narrative, projecting generational wealth and unshakable stability to their elite peers. I zoomed in on Bradley's face, behind the veneered smile and the expensive tailoring. A distinct, panicked tension tightened the corners of his mouth. A faint sheen of cold sweat caught the flash of the cameras. His commercial real estate empire faced a catastrophic collapse, burdened by insurmountable toxic debt. He desperately needed my stolen inheritance to leverage a shadow loan, and he failed. He stood under the crystal chandeliers, smiling for the municipal elite, secretly bleeding to death on the financial floor. I swiped the tablet screen off, plunging the glass into darkness. I did not shed a single tear for the missing invitation. I turned my attention back to the reinforced cultivation tanks lining the back wall of my sanctuary. The nutrient-rich soil clung to my palms as I measured the precise hydration levels of my patented drought-resistant hybrids. The quiet hum of the climate control system provided a steady, methodical soundtrack. My family poured millions into ephemeral optics, throwing a lavish party to distract from their hollow reality. I dealt exclusively in roots, foundations, and absolute permanence. The heavy iron latch of the greenhouse door clanked downward. The thick glass pane swung inward, cutting through the humid, eucalyptus-scented air. Nathaniel Cross stepped over the threshold. He wore a bespoke navy wool suit, the razor-sharp tailoring contrasting violently with the damp, earthy environment of the research facility. He did not hesitate or wrinkle his nose at the smell of fertilizer and crushed leaves. He did not brush the condensation from his shoulders. He walked directly down the narrow concrete aisle, his polished leather Oxfords stepping firmly past bags of raw peat moss and coiled irrigation hoses. Nate dictated the flow of global tech markets. As the chief executive officer of Cross Industries, he orchestrated multi-billion-dollar acquisitions and dismantled rival corporations before breakfast. Men like Warren and Bradley spent their entire lives begging for a 5-minute audience in his lobby. Yet, Nathaniel bypassed the boardrooms and the country club galas, choosing instead to stand in a muddy greenhouse on a Saturday morning. He stopped beside my stainless steel workbench. He looked at the darkened tablet, then shifted his gaze to my soil-stained hands. "The country club is currently drowning in expensive champagne and desperate networking," Nate observed, his deep baritone voice resonating steadily. "Your father cornered my chief operating officer near the ice sculpture, attempting to pitch a commercial real estate portfolio." I picked up a small trowel, scraping a layer of topsoil from a ceramic pot. "Warren believes proximity equates to power. Did he mention me?" Nate leaned his tall frame against the edge of the metal table, crossing his arms. "He informed my team that you were traveling for a botanical conference. He explicitly stated you prefer to avoid high society functions because you lack the social stamina for elite corporate environments." A sharp, clinical laugh escaped my lips. "He is laying the groundwork to ensure I never intersect with his professional ambitions. He views me as a liability." "He views you through the lens of his own profound mediocrity," Nate corrected, his eyes locking onto mine. "He did not offer pity. He never offered empty sympathies. He offered razor-sharp clarity. He sees a woman working in the dirt. He completely fails to recognize the apex predator engineering a global agricultural monopoly." I set the trowel down. I picked up a sterile cotton cloth, wiping the damp earth from my fingers. "Bradley's firm is unraveling." I locked the appraisal files for the emerald collar, terminating their attempt to secure an emergency shadow loan. "They are suffocating." "Nate, they are operating entirely on fumes and stolen time." Nate uncrossed his arms. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his bespoke suit jacket. "Desperation forces arrogant men to make catastrophic miscalculations. We will not interrupt their descent. We will let them exhaust their remaining capital, burn their final favors, and commit the exact federal crimes necessary to ensure their absolute destruction." "A coiled spring," I murmured, watching his movements. "We compress them until the structural integrity shatters." "Exactly," Nate confirmed. He withdrew a small, matte black velvet box from his pocket. He did not drop to one knee. He did not recite a grand, theatrical monologue or manufacture a dramatic spectacle. We operated on a frequency of absolute mutual respect, requiring zero performative gestures. Nate opened the box. A brilliant emerald-cut diamond rested against the dark velvet. It was breathtakingly clear, devoid of ostentatious halos or unnecessary embellishments. It projected stark, undeniable power. "Your family intends to erase you from their legacy," Nate stated, stepping closer and closing the physical distance between us. "They locked you out of their fragile, crumbling dynasty." He reached out, his warm fingers wrapping gently around my wrist. He did not mind the faint trace of soil still clinging to my skin. "I am not offering a seat at their table," Nate continued, his voice dropping into a low, unwavering register. I am offering a hostile takeover. I am offering absolute partnership. We will dismantle their empire brick by brick, and we will build ours on the ruins." He lifted the diamond from the velvet cushion. "Marry me, Ivy." I looked into his steady, calculating eyes. I saw the exact reflection of my own relentless ambition. For 30 years, Warren dictated my worth, assuring me that my hands were too dirty to ever hold genuine love or command true respect. He assured me I would die a lonely troublemaker. I extended my left hand. Nate slid the platinum band onto my ring finger. The cool metal settled perfectly against my skin. The flawless diamond caught the pale morning sunlight streaming through the slanted glass panes, throwing fractured prisms of light across the damp concrete floor. "Yes," I answered, the single syllable sealing an unbreakable pact between two architects of ruin. Nate leaned forward, pressing a firm, lingering kiss against my forehead. The gesture anchored the chaotic week, solidifying the lethal strategy we had meticulously designed. We possessed the capital, the intellect, and the unyielding patience required to execute a flawless financial slaughter. I turned my hand slightly, examining the weight of the ring. My sister was currently parading around a rented ballroom, binding herself to a fraudulent air, drowning in commercial debt. She wore a stolen dress and chased a manufactured illusion. I stood in my sanctuary, binding myself to a global titan, securing an alliance that would rewrite the financial geography of the city. I looked at the brilliant diamond catching the greenhouse light, knowing the family that threw me away was about to beg for my mercy. Arrogance always breeds catastrophic overreach, and my father simply could not tolerate my quiet defiance regarding the stolen necklace. The weekend of Clara's wedding concluded in a haze of manufactured glamour, but by Tuesday morning, the financial hangover commenced. Warren realized the digital freeze I placed on the emerald collar remained absolute. His aggressive attempt to secure an emergency shadow loan for Bradley's failing commercial real estate firm hit a reinforced concrete wall. He expected me to cave under the pressure of social exile. He expected me to unlock the appraisal documents the moment the country club doors closed on my uninvited face. When I maintained my absolute silence, his irritation mutated into vindictive wrath. Tuesday afternoon found me in the primary observation lab of the university's Applied Sciences wing. I stood beneath the harsh glare of the ultraviolet grow lights, adjusting the hydration matrices for a new batch of germinating hybrid seeds. The heavy glass door to the corridor clicked open, breaking the steady, rhythmic hum of the climate control systems. Dr. Eris Thorne, the dean of the Agricultural Sciences Department, stepped inside. He did not wear his usual relaxed tweed jacket. He wore a stiff charcoal suit, pulling uncomfortably at his collar. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead. He clutched a thick manila folder against his chest like a physical shield, avoiding my gaze entirely. He walked toward my stainless steel workstation. He set the folder down on the metal surface, his fingers lingering on the cardboard edge. I did not stop calibrating the ultraviolet dials. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to bear the weight of his intrusion. "Ivy," Thorne started, his voice lacking its usual academic cadence. He cleared his throat, shifting his weight from his left foot to his right. "The Board of Regents held an emergency budgetary session yesterday evening. We experienced a sudden, severe deficit in our alumni endowment commitments. The Financial Committee mandated immediate departmental restructuring." I turned off the calibration dial. I picked up the folder and flipped the cover open. A single sheet of heavy university letterhead rested inside. The text detailed the immediate and permanent termination of my primary research grant, effectively severing my laboratory access and my monthly stipend. I read the signature line. The chairman of the endowment committee was a retired municipal judge who played 18 holes of golf with Warren every Sunday morning at the Oak Ridge Country Club. The strategy was painfully transparent. My father weaponized his social leverage. He threatened to withhold his massive annual alumni contributions and poison the well with other wealthy donors unless the university severed my financial lifeline. He intended to strip away my laboratory, my equipment, and my income. He wanted to force me out of the greenhouse and onto his polished marble floor, begging for a fraction of my own inheritance to survive. Thorne braced himself for a screaming match. Researchers facing the sudden annihilation of their life's work typically throw equipment, threaten lawsuits, or collapse into tears. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl the manila folder across the observation lab. I calmly closed the cover and slid the document back across the stainless steel table. "Effective immediately?" I asked, my tone perfectly leveled, devoid of a single trace of panic. Thorne blinked, unnerved by my chilling composure. "Yes," he stammered, rubbing the back of his neck. "You have 48 hours to clear your personal effects from the facility. I'm truly sorry, Ivy. My hands are completely tied." I gave a single, clinical nod. "Understood. Please close the door on your way out." Thorne hesitated. He opened his mouth to offer empty apologies, then thought better of it. He retreated from the lab, the heavy glass door sealing shut behind him. I stood alone in the quiet hum of the observation facility. Warren operated under a staggering, fundamental delusion. He believed my existence hinged on a $65,000 annual university stipend. He assumed the institution owned the fruits of my labor. He thought I was merely an employee tending to academic gardens. He completely failed to understand the lethal legal architecture I constructed over the past 7 years. I walked to the secure server rack humming in the climate-controlled corner of the facility. I logged into my encrypted terminal, bypassing the university intranet entirely. The drought-resistant crop patents I engineered did not belong to the Board of Regents. I secured the initial intellectual property rights independently, utilizing a highly specialized legal clause. I granted the university a mere temporary licensing agreement in exchange for dedicated laboratory space and foundational resources. The university generated tens of millions of dollars in secondary licensing fees off my patents, creating a lucrative, symbiotic relationship. By terminating my grant under Warren's pressure, the university did not just cut my funding. They accidentally triggered the immediate, irreversible cancellation of their own licensing agreement. My fingers struck the mechanical keys with rapid, lethal precision. I opened the Global Patent Registry portal. I executed the digital recall protocols, line by line. I systematically stripped the university of their licensing privileges. I migrated the entire portfolio, the hybrid seed genetics, the drought-resistant cellular matrices, and the proprietary irrigation algorithms directly into the ironclad vault of my private holding firm. The digital transfer processed in a matter of seconds. I watched the confirmation metrics flash across the monitor in stark white text. The global valuation of those specific patents exceeded $1 billion. My father orchestrated a petty country club maneuver to starve me out of a laboratory. In doing so, he unknowingly forced the university to forfeit a $1 billion intellectual property portfolio. When the Board of Regents finally realized that Warren's vindictive interference just annihilated their most lucrative revenue stream, they would blacklist him from every academic and municipal circle in the state. I logged out of the terminal, the screen fading to black. I unfastened my canvas apron and draped it over the back of my chair. I did not need 48 hours to clear my personal effects. I possessed everything of true value directly on my encrypted servers. I walked past the rows of germinating seeds, feeling the cool platinum band of Nathaniel's ring resting firmly against my finger. The quiet strength of our alliance pulsed beneath the surface. My father pushed his chips into the center of the table, confidently betting his social capital to ruin my life. I did not just call his bet. I quietly purchased the entire casino while he was busy shuffling the deck. I pushed the heavy glass door open, leaving the termination letter resting on the empty stainless steel workstation. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, inhaling deeply. He thought he was starving me out, entirely oblivious to the fact that I owned the entire agricultural reservoir. Retrieving my final physical research dossiers required stepping directly into the belly of the beast, my father's downtown commercial real estate firm. The executive suite occupied the entire 52nd floor of a towering glass monolith. The polished chrome elevator doors parted with a soft chime, revealing a sprawling expanse of imported Italian marble. I bypassed the receptionist's pristine mahogany desk. My biometric data remained active in the corporate security grid from years prior. Securing my total independence required extracting the original, handwritten botanical matrix dossiers bequeathed by my grandmother, which Warren mandated be stored within the firm's master vault. I pushed through the heavy, frosted glass double doors leading into Warren's corner office. The space functioned as a monument to manufactured intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a vertigo-inducing panorama of the city, deliberately designed to make visitors feel small. Warren sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk, gripping a heavy gold pen. Bradley lounged against the window frame, a crystal tumbler of scotch resting in his hand. Bradley wore a bespoke charcoal suit, the fabric pulling slightly across his chest as he crossed his arms. An insufferable smirk stretched across his face the moment my practical leather boots stepped onto the plush carpet. Warren dropped the gold pen. It clattered sharply against the polished wood. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, steepling his fingers to project supreme authority. "I anticipated your arrival," Warren stated, his voice rumbling with practiced superiority. "Dr. Thorne informed me you cleared your workstation yesterday afternoon. Reality possesses a remarkable ability to correct insubordinate behavior." Bradley took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch. The ice clinked against the crystal, breaking the heavy silence. It takes a staggering amount of stubbornness to throw away a career over a simple necklace. "Ivy, Clara is incredibly distressed by your ongoing tantrum. I hope you came here to offer a formal apology." I kept my feet planted firmly on the carpet. I did not cross my arms, shift my weight, or clench my jaw. I maintained absolute, terrifying stillness. I did not request an apology. I did not demand the return of my stolen property. I waited. Absolute silence forces insecure men to fill the void with their own hubris. Warren stood up. He walked around the edge of the mahogany desk, aggressively closing the physical distance. He stopped 2 feet in front of me, utilizing his towering frame to cast a shadow over my face. "You have exactly 0 leverage," Warren dictated, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mint. "The university severed your stipend. Your academic reputation is thoroughly dismantled if you attempt to retaliate. If you attempt to speak to the press or contact Clara's social circle regarding the wedding or the jewelry, I will permanently vaporize your existence in this city. I will ensure no botanical research facility, no agricultural firm, and no municipal laboratory ever reviews your resume again." Bradley pushed off the window frame. He walked over, standing shoulder to shoulder with my father, eager to participate in the execution. "Your silence is no longer a request," Bradley hissed, pointing his index finger toward my chest. "It is a strict mandate. We control the narrative. Sylvia already informed the country club that you suffered a severe mental breakdown. If you cause a single ripple of drama for my wife, I will utilize my corporate legal team to bury you in endless defamation litigation. You will spend the next 20 years paying my attorney fees. Submit. Apologize to your mother. And perhaps Warren will arrange a clerical position for you in the archives." They puffed their chests, basking in their perceived victory. They believed they held my throat in their hands. They completely failed to notice where my eyes had drifted. When Warren abandoned his leather chair to intimidate me, he left his mahogany desk entirely exposed. A thick stack of oversized financial ledgers rested squarely under the brass desk lamp. The pages lay wide open. As a botanical geneticist, my brain processes complex, microscopic cellular matrices with flawless precision. Translating corporate accounting columns required minimal effort. My eyes scanned the bold, black text and the glaring columns of red ink. The documents bore the official seal of Bradley's commercial real estate firm, the routing numbers connected directly to Warren's primary holding accounts. I absorbed the catastrophic reality they desperately attempted to conceal behind bespoke suits and country club bravado. The numbers told a story of absolute, unmitigated disaster. Bradley's firm lacked foundational liquidity. He had heavily cross-collateralized his primary waterfront developments, securing massive loans against properties that possessed plummeting valuations. To cover his ballooning interest payments, he was actively siphoning capital from Warren's commercial reserves. The ledger detailed a specific, highly leveraged commercial project in the downtown tech corridor. The loan covenants required a mandatory balloon payment in exactly 14 days. If Bradley failed to inject $50 million of liquid capital, the bank would execute a hostile foreclosure. The cross-collateralization clauses would instantly pull Warren's firm into the abyss, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction of municipal defaults. The glaring red deficit at the bottom of the page indicated a shortfall rapidly approaching catastrophic failure. The puzzle pieces locked together with devastating clarity. Clara's frantic demand for the antique emerald collar was never about bridal aesthetics. The stolen university endowment manipulation was not merely about teaching me a lesson in obedience. Warren and Bradley were drowning. They were suffocating under toxic mezzanine debt, facing imminent margin calls that would completely liquidate their manufactured dynasty. They desperately needed immediate, unencumbered capital. And their aggressive, shouting threats were nothing more than a desperate smokescreen to hide their impending bankruptcy. They operated a sinking ghost ship, parading around in tailored wool while the hull actively splintered beneath their feet. Warren tracked my line of sight. He realized I was staring directly at the exposed financial ledgers. Panic flared in his dark eyes, instantly breaking his mask of absolute control. He pivoted sharply, lunging back toward the desk with frantic, uncoordinated momentum. He slapped the heavy leather cover closed. The sharp thud echoed violently against the glass walls, shattering the illusion of his untouchable power. "Do not look at confidential corporate documents," Warren barked, his voice pitching higher, completely stripped of its previous rumbling authority. He smoothed his tie, his hands trembling slightly as he leaned against the desk to block my view. "The archival lockbox containing your grandmother's dossiers is waiting at the reception desk. Take your garbage and vacate my building immediately." Bradley stopped smirking. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. He recognized the terrifying, calculating intelligence burning in my eyes. He realized I comprehended the exact magnitude of the financial hemorrhage displayed on that desk. The man who had just threatened to bury me in 20 years of litigation suddenly looked like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had already snapped shut. I did not offer a single word of confirmation. I did not gloat. I did not threaten to expose their toxic debt to their competitors or the municipal banking boards. I simply held Warren's panicked gaze for 3 agonizing seconds, letting the absolute weight of my silence crush the remaining oxygen from the room. I let them marinate in the sheer terror of exposure. I turned on my heel. My practical leather boots struck the thick carpet with a steady, unyielding rhythm. I pushed the heavy, frosted glass double doors open, leaving the suffocating panic of the executive suite behind me. The receptionist stood precisely where Warren indicated, holding a battered steel lockbox containing my physical research dossiers. I grasped the cold metal handle, securing the final piece of my independent legacy. I walked out of the glass office without uttering a single word, carrying the exact blueprint required to completely dismantle their manufactured empire. The towering glass skyscraper of Cross Industries stood in stark contrast to the dirt and soil of my greenhouse. But the power dynamics were exactly the same. I stepped out of the private executive elevator on the top floor, my boots sinking into the thick, sound-dampening carpet. The air up here smelled of polished obsidian and ozone, entirely filtered and strictly controlled. I carried the battered steel lockbox containing my grandmother's botanical dossiers by its cold metal handle. I did not feel intimidated by the sprawling, ultra-modern architecture surrounding me. A greenhouse requires strict atmospheric regulation to cultivate growth. A corporate fortress utilizes the exact same principles to cultivate wealth. I pushed through the heavy oak doors leading into the primary boardroom. The space featured a massive, single-slab granite conference table overlooking the city skyline. Nathaniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretching out beneath him. He held a ceramic mug of black coffee. He did not wear a tie, projecting the effortless authority of a man who owned the building. When the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, he turned, his gaze anchoring me. He did not ask about my emotional state. He recognized the cold, predatory focus sharpening my features. Sitting at the far end of the granite table was Elias Caldwell. Caldwell served as my private legal counsel and the chief financial architect of my anonymous agricultural holding firm. He was a man carved entirely from flint. He wore a razor-sharp, midnight blue suit, his posture rigid and uncompromising. Caldwell did not practice law to seek justice. He practiced law to dismantle opponents with surgical, devastating precision. He operated in the shadows, ensuring my billion-dollar crop patents remained impenetrable. I walked the length of the room and set the battered steel lockbox onto the granite surface. The heavy thud resonated through the silent boardroom. I secured the physical dossiers, I announced, pulling out a leather chair and taking my seat. More importantly, I secured the exact dimensions of their impending collapse. Caldwell opened his encrypted laptop, his fingers resting over the mechanical keys. He did not offer pleasantries. Detail the exposure. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool stone table. I accessed the photographic memory that allowed me to sequence complex cellular structures. Warren left the master ledgers exposed on his desk. Bradley's commercial real estate firm is suffocating under toxic mezzanine debt. They heavily cross-collateralized 3 primary waterfront developments. The construction stalled. The properties possess plummeting valuations. To mask the hemorrhage, Bradley actively siphoned capital from Warren's commercial reserves. Caldwell's fingers struck the keyboard, initiating a silent, aggressive crawl through secondary banking channels and public municipal records. Specify the timeline and the deficit. They face a mandatory balloon payment in exactly 14 days, I stated, the numbers crystal clear in my mind. If they fail to inject $50 million of liquid capital, the bank will execute a hostile foreclosure. The cross-collateralization clauses will instantly drag Warren's firm into the abyss, alongside Bradley. Nate stepped away from the window, pulling out the chair beside me. He set his coffee mug down, a slow, dangerous smile curving his lips. They cornered you in an office, threatening to destroy your reputation, while actively bleeding to death on their own floor. They operate a ghost ship, I confirmed. Clara demanding the antique emerald collar was a desperate bid for collateral. Warren orchestrating the termination of my university grant was a frantic attempt to force my submission and extract my inheritance. They possess zero liquidity. They are hunting for a $50 million corporate bailout. Caldwell stopped typing. He turned his laptop screen toward me. Glaring red graphs and complex debt structures populated the display. My mental snapshot perfectly matched the forensic data Caldwell pulled from the shadow markets. "Your assessment is flawless," Caldwell murmured, his voice a low, lethal rasp. Bradley's firm issued high-yield corporate bonds to finance the waterfront development. Those bonds are currently trading at severe junk status on the secondary market. The institutional investors holding the debt recognize the impending default. They are desperate to offload the toxic assets to mitigate their own losses. I stared at the red lines bleeding across the monitor. Warren and Bradley believed they held the reins of power. They spent decades mocking my profession, insisting I lacked the fundamental pedigree to understand elite corporate environments. They shoved me out of a wedding to protect their pristine optics, completely failing to realize optics cannot halt a foreclosure. I did not want to simply watch them crash into the rocks. I wanted to build the rocks. "Purchase the debt," I commanded, my voice dropping into a clinical, unforgiving register. Caldwell tilted his head, a flicker of genuine respect lighting his dark eyes. "Clarify the directive." "Use the anonymous agricultural holding firm," I instructed, tracing a finger across the polished granite table. "Deploy the surplus capital generated by the drought-resistant patents. I want you to silently acquire every single toxic commercial debt bond tied to Bradley's sinking real estate company. Buy them off the secondary market today. Pay whatever premium the institutional investors demand to expedite the transfer." Nate leaned back in his chair, watching me with absolute reverence. He recognized the maneuver. He watched the botanist seamlessly execute the ultimate corporate slaughter. "If we purchase the collective debt," Caldwell verified, his fingers hovering over the execution commands, "your anonymous holding firm officially becomes their absolute, unyielding primary creditor. You will own the $50 million balloon payment when the deadline arrives in exactly 2 weeks. They will owe the money directly to you. And when they inevitably fail to secure the capital, I continued, feeling the cool metal of Nate's platinum ring against my skin, I will possess the unilateral legal authority to trigger the cross-collateralization clauses. I will foreclose on Bradley's firm, seize the waterfront developments, and liquidate Warren's entire commercial reserve to cover the deficit. I intended to sever their puppet strings and replace them with steel cables. They wanted to maintain a facade of generational wealth. I would force them to sign the deed of their manufactured dynasty directly over to the daughter they discarded. Executing the acquisition protocols now, Caldwell stated. The boardroom fell silent, save for the rapid, percussive strikes of Caldwell's fingers against the mechanical keyboard. He navigated the complex digital labyrinths of the secondary bond markets, utilizing the impenetrable corporate veil of my holding firm to mask the buyer's true identity. Warren and Bradley would receive a standard automated notification that their debt had been transferred to a private equity group. They would celebrate the delay, falsely assuming a faceless corporation might offer them a leniency extension. They would never suspect the predator waiting at the end of the leash. 10 minutes later, a heavy laser printer in the corner of the boardroom whirred to life. Caldwell stood up, retrieving the thick stack of premium, watermarked paper. He carried the documents to the granite table, sliding them precisely in front of me. He uncapped a heavy silver fountain pen, offering it handle first. "The digital transfers are locked," Caldwell announced. "These are the physical acquisition drafts, securing your position as the primary debt holder. Sign the execution line to finalize the trap." I took the silver pen. The metal felt cold and heavy in my grip. I looked down at the complex legal jargon, the dense paragraphs detailing interest rates, default penalties, and absolute asset seizure rights. Warren built his entire life around reading documents exactly like this one. He utilized contracts to bully competitors and exploit municipal zoning boards. He weaponized paper. I pressed the silver nib against the signature line. I did not hesitate. I signed my full legal name in dark, flowing ink, binding the arrogant patriarch and his fraudulent son-in-law to my unyielding terms. I pushed the documents back across the granite table. Caldwell collected the paperwork, slipping the stacks seamlessly into his leather briefcase. The trap was set. The countdown officially commenced. They had exactly 3 weeks to desperately hunt for a lifeline that I had already severed. The ink dried on the acquisition papers, officially transforming their arrogant dynasty into a fragile house of cards waiting for a stiff breeze. With the post-wedding bliss fading into mounting financial terror, my mother deployed her favorite weapon, the court of public opinion. Thursday morning broke with a heavy, gray overcast. I sat at the reclaimed wood desk inside the private, highly secure research facility Nathaniel provided for my ongoing genetic matrix development. I held a ceramic mug of black coffee, letting the heat seep into my palms, beside my notebook. My smartphone screen illuminated, breaking the quiet sanctuary of the laboratory. A notification banner dropped across the top of the glass, displaying an alert from a social networking platform I rarely utilized. The accompanying text, however, functioned as a targeted, vicious character assassination masquerading as a public prayer. Sylvia wove a narrative of profound tragedy. She claimed her heart bled for her eldest daughter, painting me as a deeply troubled, mentally unstable pariah who could not endure the joy of my sister's union. She explicitly stated I suffered a severe psychological breakdown, forcing the family to make the agonizing decision to exclude me from the ceremony to protect the fragile peace of the bridal party. She referenced my termination from the university, twisting Warren's vindictive sabotage into proof of my erratic, self-destructive behavior. She ended the manifesto by begging her expansive network of municipal elites to offer their prayers for my ailing mental health, asking for grace during a trying chapter for their otherwise perfect dynasty. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The liquid burned pleasantly down my throat. I scrolled down, dragging my finger across the glass to reveal the resulting digital avalanche. The comment section resembled a feeding frenzy. Dozens of wealthy socialites, country club board members, and municipal wives rushed to offer their manufactured sympathies. Women who regularly ignored me at holiday galas suddenly possessed deep, profound insights into my supposed psychological decay. They typed paragraphs praising Sylvia's strength. They lauded Clara's bravery for smiling through such a traumatic sibling betrayal. They spewed toxic pity, commenting on how I always seemed isolated, how I preferred the dirt of a greenhouse to the refinement of their polished circles, diagnosing my introversion as a dangerous pathology. They ostracized me with absolute, synchronized precision, building a digital wall designed to ensure I could never show my face in their community again. My mother engineered the smear campaign to execute two distinct objectives. First, she intended to completely isolate me, stripping away any lingering social capital I possessed to force my absolute submission. Second, she created a massive, dramatic smokescreen by directing the elite community's attention toward a fabricated family scandal. She desperately hoped to distract them from the glaring, toxic reality of Bradley's collapsing commercial real estate firm. The smartphone vibrated violently in my hand, signaling a rapid succession of incoming text messages. Clara's name dominated the screen. The notifications stacked one on top of the other, each message arriving mere seconds apart, radiating an unhinged, escalating panic. "You are completely ruining my honeymoon period. Bradley's investors are asking questions about Mom's post. You humiliated us. Draft a public apology right now. Post it to your timeline and tag Bradley's firm. Tell them you had a breakdown. Tell them you lied about the necklace. If you do not fix our image by noon, Dad will ensure you are legally committed. Answer me." I watched the text bubbles multiply. Clara's digital hysteria betrayed the crushing reality she refused to acknowledge. Bradley was snapping at her behind closed doors. The toxic debt consumed his waking hours, fracturing his arrogant facade. And Clara blamed the resulting marital tension entirely on my refusal to surrender the antique emerald collar. She demanded I humiliate myself publicly to patch the massive holes in their sinking ship. I did not type a response. I did not attempt to defend my sanity. I did not engage in a futile battle against a fabricated narrative. Arguing with a liar merely validates their premise. Silence starves them. I locked the smartphone screen and placed the device face down on the reclaimed wood desk. I turned my chair away from the digital noise, shifting my entire focus to the encrypted laptop resting on the opposite side of my workstation. The screen displayed the secure communication portal, linked directly to Elias Caldwell. While Sylvia and Clara spent their morning typing dramatic manifestos and vicious demands, Caldwell spent his morning navigating the ruthless architecture of the secondary bond markets. I opened the encrypted file attached to his most recent message. The document materialized on the screen, bearing the verified digital seals of international clearinghouses. I traced the routing numbers with my index finger. The sequence confirmed the absolute, irrevocable transfer of $50 million in commercial debt. The institutional investors previously holding the toxic bonds tied to Bradley's waterfront developments had formally surrendered their positions, eager to offload the failing assets to my anonymous agricultural holding firm. The trap snapped shut. The execution was legally binding. I scrolled through the dense paragraphs of the acquisition contract, scrutinizing the default clauses. Warren and Bradley possessed less than 2 weeks to satisfy the massive balloon payment because they relied entirely on cross-collateralization. Failing to inject the $50 million into the specific waterfront project would instantly trigger a cascading default. The legal mechanisms I now controlled granted me the unilateral authority to seize the incomplete developments, liquidate Warren's commercial reserves, and force their entire manufactured dynasty into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I stared at the glowing blue monitor, feeling the cold, heavy weight of absolute power settle over my shoulders. My family weaponized their social standing to humiliate me. They utilized their country club influence to steal my laboratory. They forged a digital consensus that I was a broken, unlovable pariah. They desperately wanted me to break down, to cry, to beg for readmission into their hollow, debt-ridden kingdom. I rested my hand on the keyboard. I did not feel an ounce of sorrow for the mother who assassinated my character or the sister who hurled vicious insults across a cellular network. I felt a terrifying, absolute calm. Let them have the comment sections. Let them collect their hollow sympathies and their digital prayers. 1,000 sympathetic comments from 1,000 wealthy socialites could not halt a commercial foreclosure. Optics do not pay municipal balloon payments. I closed the encrypted file, securing the catastrophic debt portfolio behind a wall of impenetrable digital armor. I picked up my ceramic mug, taking another slow, deliberate sip of the dark coffee. The air in my new laboratory felt crisp, clean, and entirely devoid of their toxic desperation. They screamed into their digital echo chambers, blissfully unaware that I was actively removing the ground from beneath their feet. Desperation is a highly toxic catalyst, and by Thursday evening, Warren and Bradley finally crossed the point of no return. Heavy rain battered the reinforced glass ceiling of my private research facility, the rhythmic drumming masking the quiet hum of the climate control servers. I sat at my reclaimed wood desk, aligning the cellular sequences of a new botanical hybrid on my monitor. Across the room, Nathaniel occupied a leather armchair, reviewing acquisition contracts on a sleek tablet. The sanctuary felt impenetrable, insulated from the frantic, spiraling chaos consuming my family across the city. The encrypted communication terminal resting beside my keyboard emitted a sharp, dual-tone chime. The alert bypassed standard firewalls, signaling a priority override from Elias Caldwell. I tapped the acceptance key. Caldwell's face materialized on the high-definition monitor. He sat in his dimly lit office, his posture rigid, his dark eyes locked onto the camera with lethal intensity. He did not waste time with introductory formalities. "Your father just breached the final perimeter," Caldwell announced, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that demanded absolute attention. "He bypassed the holding firm and attacked your personal archives. Look at the data stream." Caldwell executed a screen share command. A highly classified banking ledger populated my monitor. The document bore the official seal of the municipal bank where I maintained my primary accounts. I scanned the routing columns, my eyes locking onto a specific, heavily restricted account. My grandmother established a childhood trust for me decades ago. The account functioned as an untouchable safety net, walled off entirely from Warren's commercial real estate empire. I assumed sole, unyielding control of the trust upon turning 25 years old. The balance sat untouched, accruing quiet, steady interest. The ledger currently displayed a balance of absolute zero. I tracked the transaction history. Exactly 1 hour prior, an outgoing wire transfer authorized the immediate liquidation of the entire trust. $2 million vanished from the vault in a single keystroke. Nathaniel set his tablet down on the side table. He stood up, the tailored fabric of his suit shifting smoothly as he crossed the room. He stepped behind my chair, resting his hands firmly on my shoulders, his eyes scanning the glaring red withdrawal notification burning across the screen. "The account requires your physical signature and dual-factor biometric authentication for any withdrawal exceeding $10,000, Nathaniel noted, his baritone voice dropping into a dangerous register. "How did Warren bypass the institutional safeguards?" Caldwell pulled up a secondary document, projecting a scanned electronic copy of a formal legal authorization form. "He leveraged the smear campaign your mother launched this morning. Warren presented the bank manager with a fabricated medical power of attorney. He utilized Sylvia's digital manifesto as corroborating evidence, officially claiming you suffered a catastrophic psychological collapse and were mentally incapacitated. He manipulated the branch manager into overriding the biometric requirements, citing an urgent family medical emergency." I stared at the scanned document. At the bottom of the page, resting on the primary authorization line, sat my signature. It mimicked the loops and angles of my handwriting, but the pressure points lacked my fluid consistency. The ink dug too deeply into the paper at the crest of the letters, betraying a heavy, frantic hand. Warren and Bradley forged my signature. They fabricated a medical crisis, committed severe identity theft, and drained $2 million of my personal capital. "Trace the routing numbers," I instructed Caldwell, keeping my voice entirely devoid of panic. "Where did the capital land?" Caldwell navigated the digital trail with ruthless efficiency. They utilized a complex laundering matrix to obscure the destination. The $2 million bounced through 3 distinct shell corporations registered in Delaware within 15 minutes. However, The corporate veil is remarkably thin, the final destination routes directly into Bradley's primary commercial operating account. The architecture of their desperation materialized perfectly. The $50 million balloon payment loomed over Bradley's head, a rapidly ticking time bomb set to detonate at the end of next week. The toxic mezzanine debt generated relentless, agonizing margin calls. Bradley lacked the fundamental liquidity to keep the lights on in his own office. The stolen $2 million served as a pathetic, temporary tourniquet applied to a severed artery. It would satisfy the immediate municipal creditors for perhaps a week, delaying the inevitable cross-collateralization. Default just long enough for them to maintain their hollow, high society facade. They cannibalized my childhood trust to buy themselves a few extra days of breathing room. Nathaniel's grip tightened slightly on my shoulders. They crossed from civil negligence into severe federal criminality, fabricating a medical power of attorney, forging a signature on financial documents, and executing an unauthorized wire transfer across state lines constitutes egregious wire fraud. Bradley receiving the stolen capital to prop up failing commercial assets adds corporate embezzlement and money laundering to the indictment. I looked at the forged signature on the monitor. Warren spent 30 years demanding absolute obedience, punishing my independence, and mocking my botanical profession. He believed he possessed the inherent right to consume my resources to feed his bloated vanity. He believed my exclusion from Clara's wedding broke my spirit, rendering me a helpless, isolated victim, incapable of defending my own vault. He completely failed to understand the weapon he just handed me. Before this moment, my retaliation relied on purchasing their toxic debt and executing a ruthless, yet entirely legal, commercial foreclosure. I intended to bankrupt them. Now, they escalated the warfare into the federal jurisdiction. They handed me the exact, undeniable evidence required to put both of them in heavy steel handcuffs. "Do I contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation?" Caldwell asked, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to transmit the digital paper trail to the authorities. "I can dispatch a white-collar tactical unit to Warren's office by tomorrow morning. They will seize his servers and freeze his assets before he finishes his morning coffee." I reached out and touched the glass of the monitor, tracing the red line of the $2 million withdrawal. Arresting them in the quiet privacy of their downtown office offered zero catharsis. A discreet federal raid allowed them to control the narrative. Sylvia would spin the arrests as a misunderstanding, a bureaucratic error, or a witch hunt. They would hire expensive defense attorneys and drag the litigation out for years behind closed doors, protecting their precious country club optics. I refused to grant them the luxury of a quiet demise. The execution required a public stage. The slaughter needed an audience of their elite peers to witness the absolute, unmitigated destruction of their manufactured dynasty. "No!" I commanded, pulling my hand away from the screen. "Do not alert the federal authorities. Do not flag the wire transfer with the municipal bank. Let the transaction clear completely." Caldwell paused, his dark eyes narrowing in sharp understanding. He recognized the tactical restraint of an apex predator. "You want them to spend the capital." "I want them to absorb the stolen funds entirely," I confirmed, leaning back into Nathaniel's solid frame. "Lock the metadata, secure the digital footprints, the routing sequences, and the forged power of attorney. Build the forensic dossier and seal it in the holding firm's secure servers. We will deliver the evidence to the federal authorities on our own timeline." "Understood," Caldwell replied, closing the displayed documents. "The trap is loaded. I will monitor their accounts to ensure they do not attempt a secondary breach." "They took the only liquid asset they could reach," I stated calmly. "The well is dry now, they bleed." Caldwell severed the connection, the monitor fading back to my botanical cellular matrices. The heavy rain continued to batter the glass ceiling, but the atmosphere inside the laboratory felt electric. I turned my chair, looking up at Nathaniel. He stared down at me, a fiercely proud, predatory smile curving his lips. We did not need to vocalize the strategy. We shared a singular, devastating vision. We would let Warren and Bradley wear their bespoke suits, drink their expensive bourbon, and parade around their country club galas believing they successfully outsmarted the black sheep of the family. We would let them inflate their hollow egos to the absolute maximum capacity. Then, we would drop the federal hammer. I stood up, walking toward the window to watch the storm rage across the city skyline. They believed they had brilliantly stolen my safety net, completely failing to realize they had just signed their own federal death warrants. The following weekend, surrounded by the vibrant, blooming orchids of a historic botanical garden, the noise of my toxic family was completely silenced. Sunlight filtered through the vaulted glass ceiling of the conservatory, casting warm, geometric patterns across the slate walkways. The air smelled of damp earth, crushed jasmine, and thriving life. I did not rent a country club ballroom stinking of stale bourbon and desperate networking. I did not hire a superficial event planner to construct a manufactured illusion of wealth. I chose a sanctuary of roots, growth, and absolute permanence. I stood in the vestibule, smoothing the fabric of my ivory silk gown. The dress featured no heavy, ostentatious beadwork or restrictive corsetry. It hung with clean, architectural precision, allowing me to move with effortless grace. My neck remained bare, requiring no stolen emerald collars to project my worth. I held a simple, elegant bouquet of modified white orchids, a proprietary hybrid I engineered in my own laboratory, representing a microscopic fraction of my intellectual empire. I did not wait for a father to link his arm through mine. Warren forfeited that privilege the moment he declared me an unlovable troublemaker, destined for isolation. I did not require a patriarch to transfer my ownership. I commanded my own autonomy. The heavy wooden doors parted. A string quartet positioned near a cascading water feature began to play a low, resonant melody. I stepped onto the slate path, walking myself down the aisle. The guest list numbered exactly 50 people. It contained 0 municipal judges, 0 commercial real estate developers, and 0 high society socialites hunting for leverage. I looked at the faces turning toward me. I saw the dedicated research assistants who operated my climate control servers. I saw the chief engineers and lead developers who built the digital infrastructure of Nathaniel's global tech empire. Near the back row stood Elias Caldwell. My ruthless private attorney wore a tailored charcoal suit. His typically rigid posture relaxed just a fraction of an inch. He gave me a single, respectful nod as I passed. This room operated entirely on the currency of merit. We cultivated a guest list of builders, innovators, and loyal allies, leaving the parasites locked outside our gates. At the end of the slate path stood Nathaniel. He waited beneath a wrought iron archway draped in climbing green vines. He wore a bespoke midnight blue suit, his broad shoulders squared, his hands resting comfortably at his sides. He did not possess the frantic, sweating desperation that plagued Bradley during his wedding. Nathaniel radiated the quiet, immovable gravity of a titan standing on solid ground. I reached the altar. He extended his hand, his warm fingers wrapping securely around mine. He did not view me as a decorative asset to parade in front of shareholders. He looked at me with absolute, unwavering reverence. The officiant spoke, his words echoing softly against the glass panes of the conservatory. He spoke of partnership, of building a foundation capable of weathering any storm. I barely registered the traditional script. I focused entirely on the man standing before me. Warren assured you that your independence would guarantee a lifetime of isolation, Nathaniel murmured, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear the vow. He failed to understand that isolation is merely the perimeter an architect builds to keep the scavengers out. You built the fortress, Evie. I am simply honored to stand inside the walls. We secure the perimeter together, I answered, the platinum band cooling against my skin as he slid the wedding ring onto my finger. No scavengers breached the gate. We sealed the union, turning to face our curated audience. The applause that erupted did not sound polite, strained, or manufactured. It thundered through the greenhouse, genuine and full of life. Twilight descended over the botanical garden, shifting the atmosphere from a bright ceremony into a deeply intimate reception. The catering staff circulated with trays of seared scallops and vintage champagne, weaving through the rare tropical foliage. Laughter drifted across the slate patios. There were no tense whispers about plunging valuations or impending margin calls. The people in this room possessed unencumbered capital and absolute security. I stood near the edge of a reflecting pool, watching the water ripple against the stone border. Nathaniel approached, resting his hand on the small of my back. He was flanked by a woman wearing a sharp, tailored crimson blazer. "Ivy, this is Sarah," Nathaniel introduced, his tone shifting smoothly from celebration into calculated strategy. "She directs the primary public relations division for Cross Industries." Sarah offered a firm, professional handshake. She did not waste time with hollow wedding pleasantries. She operated with the same lethal efficiency as Caldwell, merely utilizing a different set of weapons. She tucked a secure, encrypted tablet under her arm. "The initial drafts are finalized, Mrs. Cross," Sarah stated, her eyes gleaming with tactical anticipation. "We secured the exclusive feature with the premier business magazine. They cleared the front cover for Tuesday morning." She unlocked the tablet and handed the device to me. The screen displayed the digital mock-up of the upcoming publication. The high-definition photograph featured Nathaniel and me, standing in the sunlit greenhouse. The framing projected absolute power, an unshakable partnership. Below the photograph, the headline anchored the page in bold. Black text, "The architect and the titan Nathaniel Cross weds billionaire geneticist Ivy Cross." I scrolled through the accompanying article. Sarah's team executed the narrative with surgical precision. The text detailed the merger of Cross Industries with my anonymous agricultural holding firm, formally unveiling Cross Agritech. The article explicitly listed my proprietary drought-resistant patents. It outlined the billion-dollar valuation of my intellectual property. It highlighted my total, unyielding control as the primary patent holder and majority shareholder. The publication completely annihilated Sylvia's Facebook manifesto. My mother spent her Thursday morning begging her country club peers to pray for her mentally unstable, destitute daughter. By Tuesday morning, those exact same socialites would stare at the front page of the most respected financial publication in the country. They would read the undeniable proof that the Troublemaker, the family exiled, possessed a net worth eclipsing the entire municipal registry. The article systematically vaporized their smear campaign, replacing their fabricated pity with awe-inspiring, documented financial supremacy. "The editorial board requires the final authorization to send the copy to the printing presses," Sarah noted, her finger hovering over the transmission icon on her own smartphone. "Once we initiate the release protocol, the digital algorithms will syndicate the story across every major financial news network within 72 hours. I looked at the tablet screen. Warren and Bradley were currently sitting in their downtown office, desperately shuffling the $2 million they stole from my childhood trust. They believed they successfully bought themselves enough time to survive the impending $50 million balloon payment. They believed they remained invisible. They had absolutely no idea that I held the detonator. When this magazine hit the newsstands, Warren and Bradley would realize the low-class gardener they mocked was the exact billionaire currently holding their toxic commercial debt. The dramatic irony would shatter their fragile egos, triggering a desperate panic tailspin. They would realize they committed federal wire fraud by stealing from a woman who could buy and sell their entire commercial real estate firm before finishing her morning coffee. I handed the tablet back to Sarah. "Authorize the release," I commanded, my voice cold and clinical. "Execute the syndication protocols. Let the market digest the merger." Sarah smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "Consider it done. Congratulations on your wedding. Ivy." The press release hits the wire at dawn. She turned on her heel, disappearing into the crowd of celebrating guests to initiate the global media cascade. Nathaniel stepped closer, wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin near my temple, looking out over the reflecting pool. We had successfully insulated ourselves from their poison. We secured the intellectual property, purchased the toxic debt, documented the federal wire fraud, and now we loaded the public relations artillery. "The trap is fully armed," Nathaniel murmured, the vibration of his chest pressing against my back. "The countdown to Tuesday begins." A photographer approached the edge of the patio, raising his camera to capture the evening light reflecting off the water. He politely requested a final portrait to document the reception. I turned in Nathaniel's arms, the silk of my gown brushing against his tailored suit. I tilted my chin upward, meeting his steady gaze. I kissed my husband as the cameras flashed, knowing the resulting photographs would act as a devastating financial bomb. The premier business magazine hit the newsstands on Tuesday morning, and the resulting shockwave registered as a catastrophic earthquake in the suburbs. I sat inside the climate-controlled observation deck of the Cross Agri-Tech headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass separated my private office from the sprawling, multi-acre cultivation floors below. I held a stainless steel stylus, adjusting the digital schematics of a cellular hydration matrix on my monitor. The environment remained perfectly sterile, governed by absolute precision and calculated growth. My smartphone rested on the polished obsidian surface of my desk. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, the digital syndication algorithms executed Sarah's media strategy. The global press release hit the financial wires. The glossy magazine covers populated newsstands, airport lounges, and country club lobbies across the state. The smartphone illuminated. It vibrated against the stone desk with a sharp, mechanical buzz. I did not reach for the device. I watched the caller identification flash across the glass. Sylvia. The buzzing stopped, logging a missed call. 2 seconds later, the device vibrated again. Warren, the sequence repeated, accelerating into a relentless, unbroken physical hum as the incoming calls stacked one on top of the other. The aluminum casing of the phone physically inched across the obsidian desk, propelled by the sheer desperate velocity of their panic. I picked up my ceramic mug, taking a slow sip of black coffee. I watched the digital counter climb. 10 missed calls, 25 missed calls, 50 missed calls. They operated in a state of absolute, unmitigated frenzy. The manufactured illusion they spent their entire lives protecting had just violently collided with an unyielding titanium wall. They walked into their country club dining rooms, expecting to receive sympathetic pats on the back for enduring their mentally unstable, isolated daughter. Instead, they stared at a high-definition photograph of me standing beside Nathaniel Cross, the undisputed apex predator of the global tech industry. The counter hit exactly 84 missed calls. The physical vibrations finally ceased, replaced by a cascading waterfall of voicemail transcription notifications. I set my ceramic mug down. I tapped the screen, bypassing the visual text to play the audio recordings. I wanted to hear the exact structural integrity of their egos snapping in real time. I activated the speakerphone, letting their voices fill the sterile quiet of my office. The first recording belonged to Clara. "Ivy, answer your phone right now!" Clara shrieked. She omitted her usual bored, condescending drawl, her voice pitched into a breathless, uncoordinated gasp, entirely stripped of its bridal superiority. I am standing in the salon, and people are staring at me. Tell me this is a prank. Tell me you did not marry Nathaniel Cross. Bradley is tearing his office apart. He threw a glass paperweight through his monitor. You have to call us back. You have to introduce us to him today. Bradley needs capital. Ivy, answer me. The audio feed severed with a harsh click. The dramatic irony imploded directly inside Clara's manicured hands. She spent months mocking my practical clothes and my research grants. She paraded her fraudulent air of a husband in front of me, boasting about his corporate connections. She just realized the man she bound herself to was currently drowning in toxic commercial debt, while the sister she banished commanded an intellectual empire and slept beside a global titan. The second recording cued automatically. Sylvia's voice filtered through the speaker. "Ivy, darling," Sylvia began, her tone quivering wildly. She desperately attempted to deploy her saccharine, maternal manipulation, but the underlying terror bled through every syllable. "We saw the publications. Your father and I are entirely stunned. You kept such a monumental secret from your own family. We are hurt, but we forgive you. People at the club are asking questions about my Facebook post. The board members are confused. We need to present a united front, sweetheart. We need to schedule a press conference to show we are a supportive family. Call your mother back immediately. I listened to Sylvia's frantic backpedaling. Her smear campaign detonated in her own face. The municipal elites she begged for prayers were currently scrutinizing her sanity. She publicly labeled a billionaire geneticist married to a global tech CEO as a destitute, jealous pariah. Her country club peers recognized the blatant, pathetic lie, and Sylvia's pristine social currency evaporated in an instant. She begged for a united front because she realized she was currently standing completely alone on a sinking ship. The third voicemail began. Warren. The patriarch did not shout. He did not issue his standard, rumbling mandates. His breath hitched, the sharp intake of air rattling the microphone on his device. Ivy, it is your father, Warren stated, his vocal cords strained, vibrating with a heavy, suffocating desperation. Pick up the phone. I am sitting in my office with Bradley. We require an immediate audience with your husband. He paused, swallowing hard. The silence on the recording stretched, exposing the catastrophic fear he could no longer conceal. Warren and Bradley spent the past 72 hours desperately hunting for a $50 million corporate bailout. They needed that exact capital injection to satisfy the looming balloon payment on their waterfront developments. They utilized the $2 million they stole from my childhood trust to temporarily pacify their minor municipal creditors. But the massive, lethal margin calls still loomed over their heads. Warren intended to pitch his fraudulent real estate portfolio directly to Cross Industries. He viewed Nathaniel Cross as his ultimate salvation. He just realized the gatekeeper to that salvation was the exact daughter he had relentlessly degraded, excluded, and robbed. We understand you felt slighted regarding the wedding. Warren continued, the arrogant patriarch formally reducing himself to a groveling subordinate. He abandoned his threats of social destruction. He abandoned his mockery of my botanical profession. He desperately attempted to rewrite 30 years of psychological abuse as a minor misunderstanding. We can rectify the seating arrangement miscommunications. We can fix this. Nathaniel is your husband. Cross Industries possesses the liquidity we require to stabilize our development portfolio. You have to facilitate an introduction today. Ivy, I am commanding you. He tried to utilize the word command, but his voice cracked, rendering the mandate entirely pathetic. We are blood, Warren whispered, the audio feed capturing the raw, unvarnished sound of a man staring directly into the abyss. Call me back. The voicemails concluded. The office returned to a quiet, methodical hum. I looked at the glowing screen. A final text message arrived from Warren, flashing across the locked glass. Families need to stick together. I stared at the black text. The sheer, staggering audacity of the statement crystallized the absolute necessity of their impending execution. When I possessed nothing but a university grant and a quiet greenhouse, I was a troublemaker. I was an unlovable burden, unworthy of a dinner plate at a reception. The moment I assumed a position of unyielding global power, the moment I controlled the exact financial reservoir they desperately needed to survive, they frantically weaponized the concept of family loyalty. They wanted to stick together to utilize my husband's capital. They completely failed to realize they were already sticking together on my financial ledger. They did not know that Elias Caldwell had successfully purchased every single toxic commercial debt bond tied to their sinking real estate company. They did not know I possessed the digital paper trail, proving they forged my signature to drain $2 million from my childhood trust across state lines. They believed they merely needed to apologize for a wedding invitation to secure a $50 million bailout. They thought they were negotiating with a daughter holding a grudge. They had absolutely no idea they were actively bleeding in the jaws of an apex predator. I did not type a response. I did not return a single call. Silence operates as the most devastating weapon against narcissists demanding validation. I lifted the smartphone and turned it over, placing the device face down on the polished obsidian desk. I severed their access to my oxygen, sealing them inside their own suffocating panic. 30 years of being treated like absolute garbage, and it took a single glossy magazine cover to bring them instantly to their knees. Unable to reach me digitally, The golden child decided to mount a desperate physical invasion of my research sanctuary. Tuesday afternoon sunlight poured through the vaulted glass ceiling of the Cross Agritech primary greenhouse, casting long, geometric shadows across the polished concrete floor. The climate control servers hummed a steady, low-frequency rhythm, maintaining the exact atmospheric humidity required for my proprietary genetic matrices. The environment operated on strict, uncompromising order. The secure intercom resting on my stainless steel workstation emitted a sharp chime. The lobby security director informed me that a frantic woman matching my sister's description was currently demanding access to the private executive elevator, threatening to scream until the police arrived. I did not instruct security to escort her off the premises. I tapped the authorization icon on the monitor. I opened the reinforced gates, deliberately allowing the cornered predator to walk directly into the snare. The heavy frosted glass doors at the end of the corridor violently swung open. Clara stormed onto the cultivation floor. Her usual pristine, curated aesthetic had completely dissolved. She wore a wrinkled silk blouse, the fabric stained with spilled coffee near the collar. Her hair, typically styled into a flawless cascade, hung in uncoordinated, static-charged strands around her pale face. Her heavy, imported designer handbag swung wildly from her shoulder, striking her hip with every frantic, aggressive step. She did not resemble a triumphant bride enjoying her honeymoon period. She resembled a parasitic organism actively realizing its host was dead. I stood at the stainless steel potting station, my hands covered in dark, nutrient-rich soil. I held a delicate, proprietary drought-resistant seedling, carefully untangling the microscopic root system with a silver trowel. I did not look up when her heavy heels struck the concrete. I maintained my focus entirely on the fragile plant, letting her drown in the agonizing silence of the greenhouse. "You ignored 84 phone calls," Clara shrieked, her voice echoing harshly against the glass panes. She closed the distance, stopping on the opposite side of the steel workstation. Her chest heaved, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the metal table. I stood in the country club salon while a dozen women shoved that magazine cover into my face. "You humiliated our family on a global scale. You lied to us." I scooped a measured cup of volcanic loam, pressing it gently around the exposed roots of the seedling. "I never lied about my wealth, Clara. You simply assumed my silence equated to failure. You projected your own intellectual bankruptcy onto me." Her jaw clenched, the muscles ticking erratically beneath her skin. The cold, unyielding reality of my composure infuriated her. She desperately needed me to react, to scream, to validate her manufactured hysteria. "Drop the arrogant act, Ivy!" Clara snapped, slamming her palm against the steel table. The impact rattled the empty ceramic pots. "We read the article. Nathaniel Cross just absorbed your holding firm. He controls billions of dollars in liquid capital. Bradley is suffocating. His commercial real estate firm is facing a catastrophic margin call. If we do not secure exactly $50 million before the end of the month, the municipal banks will execute a hostile foreclosure on his waterfront developments. They will seize everything." "Bradley constructed a dynasty on toxic mezzanine debt," I replied smoothly, leveling the soil with my thumb. "Foreclosure is the standard mathematical consequence of gross financial incompetence." Clara leaned forward, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She shed the last remaining layer of her high society facade, exposing the terrifying, unhinged desperation festering underneath. "You are going to fix this," Clara commanded, pointing a trembling index finger at my face. "You are going to arrange an immediate private introduction with Nathaniel. You are going to convince your husband to issue Bradley a $50 million corporate bailout. We can structure it as a private equity investment. We will even grant Cross Industries a minority stake in the waterfront properties. But you have to execute the transfer today. If the bank liquidates Bradley, the cross-collateralization clauses will drag Dad's firm into bankruptcy alongside us." I set the silver trowel down on the steel surface. The metal chimed sharply into the quiet room. I finally looked up, meeting her frantic, bloodshot gaze. "You excluded me from your wedding to protect your superficial optics," I stated, my voice dropping into a clinical, unforgiving register. You allowed Warren to terminate my university stipend to starve me into submission. You actively participated in a digital smear campaign, attempting to convince the entire municipal elite that I suffered a severe psychological collapse. And now you march into my laboratory and demand I utilize my husband's capital to save your fraudulent empire. Clara recoiled slightly, blinking rapidly as the absolute absurdity of her request was laid bare. But narcissism possesses an impenetrable shield. Instead of recognizing her egregious hypocrisy, she doubled down on her delusion. "We are family!" Clara screamed, her voice pitching higher, scraping against the glass walls. "You owe us. We gave you a pristine reputation. We provided you with a lineage. You spent your entire life digging in the dirt, embarrassing us at every gala, refusing to conform to our standards. We tolerated you. You owe us this bailout." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I countered, my posture rigid and unyielding. "Your lineage is a hollow shell built on high-yield junk bonds. Your dynasty is a sinking ghost ship. I will not authorize a single cent to stop you from drowning." The refusal severed Clara's final tether to sanity. The realization that she possessed zero leverage, that the sister she tormented now held the absolute power of life and death over her financial future, triggered a violent, explosive tantrum. Clara let out a raw, guttural shriek. She lunged forward, sweeping her arm violently across the stainless steel workstation. Her heavy designer handbag crashed into a sterilized tray of glass nutrient vials. The tray launched off the edge of the table. A dozen glass cylinders shattered against the concrete floor, sending sharp, jagged shrapnel in pools of blue synthetic hydration fluid exploding across the aisle. She knocked over a stack of ceramic pots, the clay cracking loudly as it hit the ground. She flailed, her manicured hands tearing at the immaculate organization of my botanical sanctuary. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still amidst the raining glass and the chaotic destruction, watching a 30-year-old woman throw a physical tantrum because she could no longer control her primary victim. "You ungrateful parasite!" Clara shrieked, her chest heaving as she stared at the shattered glass surrounding my boots. Tears of absolute rage spilled over her eyelashes, ruining her expensive cosmetics. "You think you can just walk away and let us lose everything? You think you hold the high ground? We already took what we needed to survive this week." I narrowed my eyes, recognizing the exact trajectory of her hysterical confession. I needed her to cross the final threshold. "You refer to the $2 million currently missing from my childhood trust account," I prompted smoothly, maintaining a dangerously calm volume. "Yes!" Clara screamed, completely blinded by her venomous rage, entirely abandoning any semblance of legal self-preservation. "Bradley needed the capital to delay the municipal creditors. Dad signed the medical authorization forms because you refused to help us. We only took the trust fund money because you owed us for raising you." Silence slammed back into the greenhouse, thick and suffocating. Clara stood panting, staring at me with a twisted, triumphant sneer. She genuinely believed her confession functioned as a victory. She believed stealing $2 million through federal wire fraud was a justifiable tax I owed the family for my perceived disobedience. She included herself in the execution of the crime, utilizing the plural pronoun to confirm her absolute, undeniable complicity in the embezzlement. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten her. I simply shifted my gaze upward, looking past Clara's shoulder toward the upper corner of the vaulted ceiling. Mounted flush against the steel crossbeams sat a high-definition, commercial-grade security camera. A small, solid red light glowed steadily beside the primary optical lens. The environmental control matrix of Cross Agritech required absolute surveillance. The system captured uncompressed, flawless video and synchronized, crystal-clear audio to monitor the delicate botanical hybrids. Clara tracked my line of sight. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto the glowing red light. The triumphant sneer violently melted off her face. The blood drained entirely from her cheeks, leaving her skin the color of wet ash. The catastrophic magnitude of her mistake crashed over her in real time. She just stood inside a heavily monitored corporate facility and explicitly confessed to conspiring. executing, and benefiting from a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud. She provided the exact motive. She confirmed the forged medical authorization. The trap snapped completely shut, securing her neck in the steel jaws alongside her father and her husband. Clara stumbled backward, her heavy designer bag slipping from her shoulder and crashing into the spilled blue fluid. Her mouth opened, but her paralyzed vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. The devastating reality of the federal penal code finally pierced her arrogant delusion. "The exit is exactly where you left it," I stated, picking up the silver trowel to resume my work. Clara turned and fled. Her heavy heels clicked frantically against the concrete, slipping slightly in the puddle of hydration fluid as she scrambled toward the frosted glass doors. I watched her storm out of the greenhouse, securing the pristine audio file that would ensure her husband spent a decade in a federal penitentiary. Refusing to accept defeat from a daughter he fundamentally despised, my father executed a breathtakingly arrogant pivot. To Warren, the universe operated on a strict, unyielding, patriarchal hierarchy. He spent 3 decades actively categorizing me as a defective, unprofitable asset. Reading a prominent financial publication detailing my billion-dollar intellectual property did not alter his foundational worldview. It merely shattered his cognitive processing. His fragile ego aggressively rejected the undeniable reality of my supremacy. A man who spent 30 years demanding absolute submission cannot psychologically process a subordinate suddenly holding the executioner's axe. Therefore, his desperate mind fabricated a new, easily digestible narrative. He convinced himself that Nathaniel engineered my anonymous agricultural holding firm as an elaborate corporate tax shelter. He concluded I remained a powerless pawn, a decorative prop Nathaniel dressed in tailored silk and positioned on a magazine cover strictly for favorable public relations optics. Warren believed men controlled the capital, and men dictated the terms of survival. If the subordinate daughter refused to facilitate the bailout, the patriarch simply needed to bypass the defective asset and negotiate directly with the husband. Cross Industries hosted an exclusive annual tech gala every autumn. The event functioned as a philanthropic masquerade, a highly guarded summit where the apex predators of the global market gathered to exchange massive capital and solidify international monopolies. The ballroom would be flooded with international press, venture capitalists, and federal regulators. Securing a single entry ticket required a mandatory philanthropic donation of exactly $250,000. Warren entirely lacked the liquid cash to purchase a seat at a back table. He lacked the fundamental technological pedigree to warrant a preliminary invitation. His commercial real estate firm operated on a municipal, microscopic level compared to the titans attending the gala. However, desperation breeds unholy alliances. Warren burned the final remnants of his fading municipal currency. He relentlessly leveraged 2 decades of political blackmail, calling in a severe favor from a compromised city zoning commissioner who owed my father a career-saving debt. The panicked commissioner utilized a restricted municipal guest pass to manipulate the security algorithms, sliding Warren's name onto the secondary investor presentation registry. Warren successfully secured a direct, 15-minute pitch slot with the Cross Industries Executive Acquisition Board. His overarching strategy reeked of unhinged, patriarchal hubris. Warren intended to march into the most exclusive corporate fortress in the city, corner Nathaniel in a private presentation suite, and pitch the failing, toxic waterfront developments as a lucrative, once-in-a-lifetime real estate acquisition. He printed glossy brochures detailing the cross-collateralized properties, entirely omitting the toxic mezzanine debt and the plummeting valuations. He intended to lie to the face of a global titan, assuming Nathaniel lacked the forensic accounting resources to uncover the glaring deficits. He planned to demand a $50 million bailout, framing it as a mutually beneficial partnership. Simultaneously, he intended to execute my character assassination. Warren prepared a fabricated, heavily manipulated dossier detailing my supposed psychological instability. He planned to sit across from my husband and expose my low-class roots, recounting manufactured tales of my stubbornness, my preference for soil over society, and my blatant refusal to conform to elite standards. He intended to warn Nathaniel that his new bride was an erratic, estranged pariah who would ultimately humiliate Cross Industries and destroy their pristine corporate image. Warren genuinely believed Nathaniel would express profound gratitude for the patriarchal warning. He believed my husband would instantly initiate divorce proceedings, cast me back into the dirt, and enthusiastically issue a $50 million check to the real businessman of the family. Wednesday evening brought a heavy, rolling thunderstorm across the city skyline. I sat beside Nathaniel on a low-profile leather sofa inside the Cross Industries executive penthouse. The space possessed absolute silence, insulated from the chaos of the city below by layers of reinforced, sound-dampening glass. A massive holographic projector rested on the glass coffee table, illuminating the center of the darkened room. The device displayed the interactive digital guest list for the upcoming Saturday gala. I held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, watching the names scroll past in glowing white text. International banking chairmen, Silicon Valley pioneers, and federal senators floated through the air. Nathaniel tapped the control pad, pausing the digital cascade. He isolated a specific entry buried deep within the secondary municipal tier. He expanded the data file, projecting the information directly in front of us. Warren Thorne, primary investor pitch, 15 minutes. Nathaniel let out a low, dark chuckle, the sound vibrating with lethal amusement. He leaned back against the leather cushions, crossing his ankle over his knee. The sheer, staggering audacity of the man is almost worthy of a museum exhibit. Nathaniel murmured, his eyes locking onto my father's glowing name. He sent his daughter to throw a tantrum in your greenhouse yesterday, and now he intends to bypass my executive gatekeepers on Saturday. He believes I am a biological tax write-off, I corrected, swirling the water in my crystal tumbler. The ice clinked sharply against the glass. Clara fled the greenhouse yesterday after confessing to federal wire fraud on a recorded security matrix. She clearly sprinted directly to Bradley. Either they chose to conceal the recording from Warren to avoid his wrath, or Warren is so completely consumed by his own arrogance that he believes pitching you will grant him federal immunity. He assumes he can sell me a sinking ship while simultaneously convincing me to throw my captain overboard, Nathaniel noted, reaching out to trace the rim of my glass with his index finger. He will bring the fabricated medical power of attorney, I predicted, analyzing my father's tactical history with clinical precision. He will utilize the exact forged documents he used to drain $2 million from my childhood trust. He will present them to you as undeniable proof of my mental incompetence, hoping to force an immediate conservatorship or a rapid annulment. Nathaniel dropped his hand, his expression shifting from amusement into an absolute, predatory calm. He did not possess a fragile ego. He did not require the spotlight to validate his supremacy. He recognized the gala served as the perfect public execution square, and he recognized I held the axe. I control the technology, Ivy, Nathaniel stated, his voice a steady, grounding anchor in the quiet room. But you control the entire narrative. He is hunting for a $50 million lifeline to survive the cross-collateralization default. He believes he is walking into a negotiation with a fellow patriarch. Nathaniel picked up the digital control pad. He selected Warren's presentation slot and transferred the ownership credentials directly to my executive profile. I defer absolute authority to you, Nathaniel vowed, pressing the control pad into my palm. His warm fingers curled around mine, sealing the transfer of power. You will command the presentation suite. You will structure the execution exactly as you see fit. When he steps into that room expecting to find a sympathetic billionaire, he will find the botanist who owns his debt, possesses his wire fraud confession, and controls his absolute destruction. I gripped the control pad, feeling the solid weight of the technology in my hand. I looked at Warren's name glowing in the holographic light. He spent my entire life trying to silence me, and now he was voluntarily walking into a soundproof room where no one could hear him scream. Warren genuinely believed he was walking into a boardroom to secure his legacy, completely oblivious to the federal guillotine waiting above his neck. The grand ballroom of the Cross Industries Convention Center was a sea of crystal chandeliers and billionaires, the perfect arena for a public execution. Thousands of fractured lights illuminated the sprawling expanse of polished Italian marble and vaulted architectural crossbeams. The ambient noise consisted of hushed corporate negotiations, the clinking of heavy crystal flutes, and the quiet, continuous transfer of generational wealth. I stood near the primary entrance, obscured slightly by a towering structural pillar draped in woven platinum fibers. I wore a backless, floor-length gown spun from obsidian silk. I wore zero jewelry. I required no frantic accessories, no stolen antique emerald collars, and no ostentatious displays of credit. Real power requires zero decoration. It simply occupies the space. The guest list operated as a physical manifestation of absolute global supremacy. Silicon Valley pioneers stood shoulder to shoulder with international banking chairmen and federal senators. They communicated in the silent language of unencumbered capital. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, the heavy gilded doors parted. My family arrived, bleeding desperation into the pristine environment. Warren led the procession, aggressively puffing his chest to project an illusion of unshakable authority. He wore a stiff, traditional tuxedo that felt entirely out of place amidst the sleek, modern, bespoke tailoring of the tech titans surrounding him. He surveyed the room, his eyes scanning the crowd with the frantic hunger of a starving man staring at a banquet. Sylvia clung tightly to his elbow. She draped herself in heavy, ostentatious diamonds that caught the chandelier light with a desperate, aggressive intensity. She plastered a rigid, manufactured smile across her face, nodding at venture capitalists who completely ignored her existence. Clara and Bradley followed closely behind, completing the pathetic parade. Clara wore a tight emerald gown, clutching a heavy metallic purse against her stomach as a physical shield. Her usual pristine, curated aesthetic had fractured. She twitched, her eyes darting nervously across the room, terrified that the security recording from my greenhouse might suddenly broadcast across the massive digital displays. Bradley sweated profusely through his tailored collar. He continually adjusted his silk tie, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles threatened to snap. He frantically hunted for the savior who could magically erase a $50 million deficit before the impending deadline expired tonight. He operated a sinking ghost ship, suffocating under toxic mezzanine debt. Yet he marched into the fortress pretending he commanded the ocean. They reeked of impending bankruptcy. I stepped out from behind the platinum-draped pillar, positioning myself directly in their path. Sylvia spotted me first. Her eyes widened, the meticulously applied cosmetics tightening severely around her mouth. She released Warren's elbow and lunged forward, closing the physical distance with predatory speed. She did not offer a maternal greeting. She bypassed societal pleasantries entirely, her manicured fingers snapping like a steel vise around my forearm. Her acrylic nails dug into my bare skin, attempting to inflict immediate physical dominance. "You have a staggering amount of nerve showing your face here," Sylvia hissed, keeping her voice pitched low to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding municipal elites. Her breath smelled of stale champagne and absolute panic. "Did you honestly believe a single magazine cover changes reality? Your father leveraged his political capital to secure a presentation slot tonight. He is going to speak directly with Nathaniel in the executive suite." I maintained absolute stillness. I did not flinch. I did not attempt to pry her fingers off my arm. I let her feel the unyielding muscle beneath the silk, denying her the satisfaction of a struggle. "We read the absurd article," Clara chimed in, stepping shoulder to shoulder with our mother, forming a wall of toxic resentment. Her voice trembled, betraying the terror she attempted to mask with manufactured disdain. "A merger, a supposed billion-dollar patent. You always possessed a talent for fabricating academic fairy tales. We know you are merely a decorative prop. Nathaniel utilizes your agricultural company as a tax shelter." Sylvia tightened her grip, her knuckles turning a sickly shade of white. "Listen to me very carefully, Ivy. Warren will walk into that boardroom tonight, and he will tell Nathaniel exactly who you are. He will detail your lifelong psychological breakdowns. He will present the medical documents proving you require severe psychiatric intervention. He will explain how you aggressively ruined your sister's wedding and isolated yourself from your own lineage. We will systematically dismantle this little charade, expose your unstable history to the entire executive board, and ensure Nathaniel divorces you before the week concludes. They believed they possessed the ultimate leverage. They intended to weaponize the forged medical power of attorney, the exact document they used to execute federal wire fraud, as a tool to destroy my marriage. Bradley stepped forward, utilizing his height to loom over me. He adjusted his silk tie again, his lips pulling back into an insufferable, condescending smirk. He entirely forgot his wife confessed to embezzlement on a high-definition recording just 3 days prior. He believed his patriarchal status granted him absolute immunity from consequences. Men of actual power do not respect women who play in the dirt, Ivy, Bradley dictated, his tone dripping with unearned, arrogant superiority. Nathaniel Cross builds global infrastructure. He requires a partner with social refinement and pedigree, not a feral botanist who hides in a greenhouse. Once Warren exposes your lack of fundamental class, Cross will cast you back into the gutter. If you want to survive the impending divorce, I suggest you instruct your husband to authorize our corporate bailout immediately, submit to your father, facilitate the $50 million transfer, and perhaps we will allow you to maintain a clerical position within the family trust. The sheer gravity of their delusion possessed a fascinating structural flaw. They fundamentally refused to acknowledge their own bleeding wounds, choosing instead to attack the apex predator holding the knife. I looked down at Sylvia's hand gripping my forearm. I did not raise my voice or attempt to defend my sanity. I did not engage in a futile debate regarding my intellectual property or my net worth. I smoothly rotated my wrist, breaking her grip with a swift, calculated application of physical leverage. Sylvia stumbled forward a fraction of an inch, her hand falling uselessly to her side, entirely stripped of its power. I looked at Warren. The patriarch remained silent, observing the ambush from a safe distance, cowardly allowing his wife and son-in-law to deliver the threats. He believed he remained insulated from the conflict, waiting to reap the rewards of their intimidation. I smiled. I did not offer a warm, forgiving expression. I stretched my lips into a terrifying, glacial curve, a purely mechanical movement completely devoid of human empathy. I looked deeply into Bradley's sweating face, then into Sylvia's panicked eyes, letting the absolute zero of my composure freeze the remaining oxygen in their lungs. I turned my back on them. I did not utter a single syllable of confirmation or denial. I did not beg them to spare my marriage. I adjusted the drape of my obsidian silk gown and walked away. I navigated through the dense crowd of global power brokers, my heels striking the polished marble with an unyielding, rhythmic precision. As I moved, a remarkable phenomenon occurred. The sea of billionaires organically parted. The international banking chairmen and federal senators stepped aside, lowering their crystal flutes, recognizing the silent, gravitational pull of absolute authority. They offered me respectful nods, completely ignoring the frantic, drowning family I left behind near the structural pillar. Sylvia, Warren, Clara, and Bradley stood frozen in the entryway, utterly confused by the dynamic unfolding before them. They expected me to retreat toward the restrooms in tears. They expected me to flee the venue to protect my fabricated facade. I bypassed the guest tables. I ignored the restricted executive elevators leading to the private suites. I walked directly toward the massive, illuminated main presentation stage erected at the front of the grand ballroom. They expected me to cower in the shadows. Entirely unprepared for the moment, I stepped directly into the blinding spotlights. A hush fell over the 800 elite guests as Nathaniel took the center podium, commanding the attention of the city's most ruthless investors. The ambient hum of corporate maneuvering evaporated, replaced by a dense, expectant silence. Men who dictated international market trends ceased their whispering. Women who controlled massive philanthropic endowments lowered their crystal flutes, turning their absolute attention toward the front of the grand ballroom. Nathaniel did not tap the acrylic podium or request their obedience. He simply occupied the epicenter of the massive stage. Resting his hands on the polished edges of the stand, the sheer gravitational force of his presence anchored the sprawling, cavernous room. He wore a stark black tuxedo, standing bathed in the harsh, uncompromising glare of the overhead theatrical lighting. He surveyed the sea of upturned faces, projecting the calculated calm of a titan completely in control of his domain. "Welcome to the Cross Industries annual tech gala," Nathaniel began, his baritone voice projecting flawlessly through the concealed acoustic arrays spanning the vaulted ceiling. "We gather tonight to celebrate structural evolution. We celebrate the ruthless, necessary destruction of obsolete systems, making way for sustainable, unyielding growth. For the past decade, Cross Industries dominated the digital infrastructure sector. We built the architecture that connects global markets. We manage billions of dollars in liquid capital. However, digital architecture lacks substance without physical sustenance." Nathaniel paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, systematically locking eyes with the heavyweights of the financial sector. "We reached a critical threshold," Nathaniel continued, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "The future of international stability no longer relies solely on silicon and code. Capital cannot generate rainfall. Algorithms cannot engineer cellular hydration in barren soil. True power relies on dominating the fundamental biological matrices that feed a planet facing catastrophic environmental decay. Therefore, Cross Industries sought a partner possessing the intellectual capital to secure that exact future." The 800 guests leaned forward in synchronized anticipation. Encrypted tablets materialized in the hands of venture capitalists, their thumbs hovering over screens. Preparing to dissect the upcoming corporate strategy, they anticipated Nathaniel introducing a team of acquired executives, a board of gray-haired scientists, or a traditional corporate merger. "Many of you read the preliminary press release published on Tuesday morning," Nathaniel stated, the sound echoing against the heavy brass fixtures of the room. The publications detailed a historic merger. They detailed an agricultural portfolio valued in excess of $3 billion, featuring proprietary, drought-resistant botanical patents capable of completely rewriting global cultivation standards. I must correct a fundamental misconception perpetuated by the media. This was not a standard acquisition. Nathaniel stepped back from the acrylic podium. He did not look at the venture capitalists. He turned his head, his eyes locking directly onto me as I stood perfectly still near the edge of the illuminated stage, half hidden in the shadows of the velvet curtains. Cross Industries did not absorb this intellectual empire, Nathaniel clarified, his tone dropping into a fierce, reverent register that commanded absolute silence from the audience. "We submitted to it. The brilliant mind behind these patents maintains absolute, unyielding control over the resulting conglomerate. She is the primary patent holder. She is the undisputed majority shareholder of Cross Agri-Tech. I am merely honored to stand beside her." He extended his hand toward me. The primary spotlight abruptly shifted, tracking his gesture, completely engulfing my obsidian silk gown in a blinding pillar of white light. I stepped out of the periphery and moved into the center of the arena. My heels struck the polished stage with a measured, rhythmic cadence. The applause started slowly, hesitant and confused at first, before erupting into a deafening, thunderous roar as the municipal elites recognized the woman ascending the stairs. The international bankers and federal senators rose to their feet, delivering a standing ovation to the architect of the $3 billion empire. I reached the podium. Nathaniel handed me the sleek, matte black microphone. The metal felt heavy, cool, and perfectly balanced in my grip. I turned to face the vast expanse of the ballroom. I did not smile. I did not wave to the crowd or offer a polite nod of acknowledgement. I stood at the absolute zenith of global corporate power, projecting the terrifying clinical detachment of an apex predator observing a corralled herd. My eyes scanned the sea of faces, instantly cutting through the glare of the chandeliers to locate my targets. Near the back of the room, standing beside the platinum-draped structural pillar, my family remained entirely paralyzed. I offered a subtle, almost imperceptible nod toward the shadows lining the perimeter of the ballroom. Elias Caldwell stood near the primary exit, leaning against the marble wall in his tailored charcoal suit. He caught my signal. Caldwell raised his hand, gesturing sharply to the elite security operatives stationed at every egress point. The execution protocols initiated simultaneously. Dozens of operatives, men carved from granite wearing discreet communication earpieces, moved with synchronized, military precision. They grasped the heavy brass handles of the primary double doors. They pulled the doors shut. A massive, echoing, mechanical thud resonated through the ballroom as the commercial deadbolts engaged. The operatives locked the secondary emergency exits. They locked the private elevator vestibules. They severed the physical escape routes, transforming the opulent convention center into a beautifully decorated, inescapable titanium cage. No venture capitalist, no federal senator, and no fraudulent commercial real estate developer would leave this room until I concluded my dissection. The resounding click of the deadbolts severed the final strings of my father's patriarchal delusion. From my vantage point on the illuminated stage, I possessed a flawless, unobstructed view of their physical collapse. Warren stood frozen, his arms hanging limply at his sides, the patriarch who spent 30 years demanding absolute submission, the man who arrogantly leveraged municipal favors to secure a 15-minute pitch slot with my husband, finally comprehended the magnitude of his error. His jaw dropped, pulling his mouth into a slack. Hollow void. The leather folder containing the fabricated medical power of attorney, the exact forged document he intended to weaponize in a private meeting, slipped from his trembling fingers. It hit the Italian marble floor with a pathetic slap, scattering his fraudulent papers across the ground. He stared at me standing behind the acrylic podium, holding the microphone, commanding the undivided attention of 800 billionaires. He realized I was not a decorative prop. I was the executioner. And he had just marched his entire lineage directly onto my chopping block. Beside him, Bradley underwent a catastrophic physiological reaction. The insufferable smirk he wore just 5 minutes prior violently evaporated. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. He clutched his chest, his bespoke suit suddenly appearing 3 sizes too large for his rapidly shrinking frame. The $50 million deficit crashed down upon his shoulders. He desperately needed a massive corporate bailout to survive tonight's cross-collateralization deadline. He desperately tried to calculate the odds that the anonymous agricultural holding firm that recently purchased every single toxic commercial debt bond tied to his sinking real estate company belonged to the woman standing on the stage. The mathematical probability hit him with the force of a freight train. He recognized that the feral botanist he mocked, the woman he commanded to submit to his authority, currently owned the deed to his ruin. Sylvia and Clara clutched each other, their manufactured social armor shattering into a million jagged pieces. Sylvia's meticulously applied cosmetics could not hide the sheer, unadulterated terror widening her eyes. Just moments ago, she dug her acrylic nails into my arm, threatening to destroy my marriage with a fabricated medical dossier. She threatened to expose me to the executive board. She now watched that exact board applaud my presence. Clara pressed her metallic purse against her mouth, stifling a panicked gasp. She remembered the shattered glass in my greenhouse. She remembered her high-definition recorded confession to a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud. She realized the $2 million they stole across state lines belonged to the undisputed titan standing in the spotlight. Clara realized the woman holding the microphone also held her husband's federal death warrant. I looked down at them, feeling zero empathy, zero hesitation, and zero regret. They expected me to cower in the shadows, entirely unprepared for the moment I stepped directly into the blinding spotlights. They assumed my silence equated to weakness. They spent their entire lives attempting to bury me beneath their toxic debt and their fragile egos, entirely failing to realize they were burying a seed, Now. The roots had breached the concrete, and the harvest had arrived. The physical exits were locked, the digital trap was loaded, and the undisputed architect of their destruction tapped the microphone twice to begin. I did not raise my voice, I simply pressed a single button on the brass presentation remote, dropping the digital hammer on their manufactured dynasty. 4 massive holographic screens suspended above the main stage instantly flickered to life. The glaring white lights cut through the ambient darkness of the grand ballroom, projecting highly classified, meticulously redacted commercial financial ledgers across the vaulting architectural crossbeams. Bold columns of red ink bled across the displays, instantly commanding the attention of the 800 elite guests. The ambient hum of corporate networking completely evaporated. Men who dictated international market trends ceased their whispering. Women who controlled massive philanthropic endowments lowered their heavy crystal flutes, setting them silently onto the linen-draped tables. Integrity forms the absolute bedrock of sustainable architecture, I stated, the matte black microphone carrying my voice with crystalline, unforgiving precision through the concealed acoustic arrays. A structure built upon toxic mezzanine debt inevitably fractures beneath its own weight. The ledgers displayed behind me detail a catastrophic commercial hemorrhage. They document a municipal developer desperately hiding a $50 million deficit through aggressive, unsustainable cross-collateralization. The venture capitalists and federal regulators occupying the front rows narrowed their eyes. They easily deciphered the projected data. They recognized the municipal routing numbers. They recognized the official corporate seals belonging to Bradley's waterfront development shell corporations. The mathematics were undeniable, broadcasting the fatal insolvency of his entire portfolio to the most ruthless investors in the city. 3 weeks ago, an anonymous agricultural holding firm entered the secondary shadow markets. I continued, pacing slowly across the polished stage. My obsidian silk gown swept silently over the floorboards. The firm silently acquired every single toxic commercial bond tied to these failing waterfront developments. The institutional investors previously holding the junk debt eagerly offloaded the toxic assets. The acquisition legally secured the anonymous holding firm as the absolute, unyielding primary creditor, placing a $50 million balloon payment squarely in their hands. I stopped pacing. I stood at the absolute edge of the illuminated stage. I looked directly down into the shadows near the platinum-draped pillar, locking eyes with the sweating, trembling man who demanded my submission just 10 minutes prior. My agricultural holding firm purchased your toxic debt, Bradley, I announced, the revelation echoing against the heavy brass fixtures of the room. You owe the $50 million directly to me. I pressed the brass remote a second time. A formal legal document materialized on the 4 massive screens, bearing the verified digital seal of Elias Caldwell's legal firm. The contractual deadline expired at exactly 8 o'clock tonight, I dictated, my voice devoid of any emotional fluctuation. You failed to secure the required liquid capital. You failed to satisfy the balloon payment, therefore acting as the primary debt holder. I formally and publicly execute the default clauses. I am triggering the cross-collateralization covenants right now. I am officially foreclosing on your waterfront developments, and I am unilaterally seizing my father's commercial reserves to satisfy the remaining deficit. Bradley's physical deterioration accelerated with terrifying speed. He grabbed the cold marble surface of the structural pillar to remain upright. The crowd of international power brokers immediately recognized the financial slaughter unfolding before them. They physically stepped away from the Thorne family, moving in synchronized unison to create a wide, empty quarantine zone around the toxic assets. Sylvia and Clara found themselves standing completely isolated in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by empty space and glaring judgment. Bankruptcy represents a standard, mathematically predictable market correction, I noted, shifting my gaze from the drowning son-in-law to the paralyzed patriarch. However, desperation frequently breeds severe criminality. Facing the impending cross-collateralization default, these developers required a temporary influx of capital to pacify their minor municipal creditors. They lacked legitimate funding. Therefore, they decided to attack a restricted childhood trust account. I pressed the brass button a third time. The financial ledgers vanished, instantly replaced by a scanned medical power of attorney, flanked by a verified banking wire transfer confirmation. My forged signature rested at the bottom of the authorization line, blown up to massive proportions for the entire room to scrutinize. The red font highlighted the extraction of exactly $2 million. My father, Warren Thorne, fabricated this medical dossier, I announced, the silence in the ballroom turning suffocating and absolute. He utilized a social media smear campaign to falsely claim I suffered a severe psychological collapse. He manipulated a municipal bank manager. He forged my signature. He authorized a fraudulent wire transfer, siphoning $2 million across state lines into Bradley's primary operating account. That action legally constitutes egregious federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. I did not wait for Warren to shout a denial. I did not allow him the oxygen to mount a defense. I pressed the final button on the brass remote. The overhead stage lights dimmed slightly. The high-definition audio file recorded inside my greenhouse began to play through the vaulted acoustic arrays, flooding the silent ballroom with the unhinged, undeniable truth. Clara's hysterical shrieks echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "We only took the trust fund money because you owed us for raising you." The pristine audio recording captured the violent shattering of glass, the dripping of synthetic hydration fluid, and the explicit, undeniable confession to the multi-million-dollar theft. Bradley needed the capital to delay the municipal creditors Dad signed the medical authorization forms because you refused to help us. The recording ceased. The ensuing silence felt heavy enough to crush bone. The venture capitalists stared at the family in profound, unvarnished disgust. The federal regulators standing near the catering tables reached into their tailored jackets, retrieving their secure communication devices, recognizing an open and shut federal indictment presented on a silver platter. Sylvia covered her mouth with her trembling, diamond-encrusted hands, choking on a suppressed sob as she watched her pristine, social currency vaporize into permanent exile. Clara wrapped her arms around her stomach, weeping uncontrollably, realizing her own tantrum just sealed her husband's fate. Bradley's knees finally buckled. The bespoke charcoal suit pooled around him as he collapsed directly onto the polished Italian marble floor. The arrogant heir, the man who spent months mocking my practical boots and boasting about his corporate connections, knelt in front of 800 power brokers, weeping openly. "Please, Ivy," Bradley choked out, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its insufferable smirk. He pressed his palms against the marble, bowing his head. "Please, we will sign the properties over. We will give you the equity. Just recall the federal evidence. I cannot go to a penitentiary. Please." Warren hyperventilated. His broad chest heaved erratically, the stiff fabric of his tailored tuxedo constricting his frantic, shallow breaths. He stumbled forward, breaching the invisible quarantine zone the crowd established. His hands trembled violently as he reached toward the illuminated stage. "Ivy, stop this," Warren pleaded, tears streaming down his weathered face, completely shattering his manufactured patriarchal armor. "You are destroying the lineage. You are vaporizing 30 years of my work. I built that commercial real estate firm from the ground up. It is my legacy. You cannot liquidate your own family. I will apologize. I will publicly apologize to you and Nathaniel. I will do whatever you demand." I stared down at the groveling patriarch and the weeping son-in-law. I felt zero satisfaction, zero pity, and zero remorse. Retribution is not an emotional release. It is merely the meticulous application of consequences. "You destroyed your own legacy the moment you forged a signature to steal from your daughter," I stated, the microphone amplifying the absolute, unforgiving coldness of my verdict. "You built a ghost ship out of toxic debt, and you demanded I drown alongside you to protect your fragile optics. I do not require your apologies. I do not require your submission. I require the $50 million you owe me, and the federal authorities require your immediate surrender." I lowered the microphone. I turned away from the edge of the stage, leaving them kneeling in the darkness. I offered a sharp nod to Elias Caldwell, signaling the attorney to transmit the unencrypted digital forensic dossiers directly to the federal regulators currently dialing their tactical units. I looked down at the men who swore I would never amount to anything, watching them drown in the inescapable wreckage of their own unparalleled greed. The heavy brass deadbolts snapped open, but the men stepping through the mahogany doors were not offering salvation. A tactical unit of federal agents flooded the grand ballroom. They wore severe navy windbreakers bearing the bold yellow lettering of the Federal Investigative Bureau. They did not pause to admire the crystal chandeliers or the Italian marble. They moved with terrifying, uncompromising purpose, parting the sea of billionaires to reach the platinum-draped structural pillar. Elias Caldwell stood near the entrance, holding his leather briefcase. He provided the lead agent with a sharp, confirming nod. The digital forensic dossier transmitted just moments prior contained the undeniable evidence, the forged medical authorization, the routed municipal bank transfers, and the pristine audio confession. The burden of proof was absolute. The lead agent stepped into the quarantine zone the crowd had established. He retrieved a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "Warren Thorne and Bradley Vance," the agent announced, his voice slicing through the thick, suffocating silence of the room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and corporate extortion." The metallic ratcheting of the handcuffs echoed sharply against the architectural crossbeams. The agents secured Bradley first. The arrogant heir offered zero physical resistance. His knees remained buckled against the polished floor. Two agents gripped him by the armpits, hauling his limp, sobbing frame upward. The bespoke charcoal suit pulled awkwardly around his shoulders as they dragged him toward the exit. Warren fought the reality. The patriarch desperately attempted to leverage his evaporated authority. He planted his feet, puffing his chest, trying to stare down the federal operatives. "You cannot do this," Warren stammered, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. "I am a premier municipal developer. I command a vast commercial real estate empire. There is a massive misunderstanding. Let me speak to my daughter. Let me speak to Nathaniel Cross." The agents ignored his frantic mandates. They slammed his wrists together, fastening the steel bracelets tight against his skin. They turned him around, forcing him to face the 800 elite guests. The venture capitalists and federal regulators did not offer sympathy. They raised their encrypted smartphones, capturing high-definition footage of the disgraced patriarch executing the ultimate public perp walk. Flashing red and blue sirens illuminated the frosted glass of the convention center lobby, signaling the arrival of the transport vehicles. Sylvia lunged forward, her diamond-encrusted hands reaching for Warren's sleeve. An agent stepped firmly in her path, blocking her advance. Sylvia let out a raw, unhinged shriek, a sound completely stripped of her curated, high-society refinement. Clara collapsed against the marble pillar, clutching her heavy metallic purse against her chest, weeping hysterically as she watched her husband disappear into the corridor, surrounded by tactical vests. 14 months later, the justice system finalized the mathematical correction. I sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer, sitting beside Nathaniel. We watched the judge strike the heavy wooden gavel. Warren and Bradley received consecutive sentences, totaling 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The federal prosecutor utilized the pristine audio recording from my greenhouse, letting Clara's shrieking confession echo through the court. The judge offered zero possibility of early parole. He explicitly cited their egregious abuse of a medical power of attorney and their flagrant manipulation of a childhood trust as aggravating factors. Warren looked back at me from the defense table, wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He looked hollowed out, entirely stripped of his roaring bluster. I did not smile. I held his gaze with absolute zero temperature, watching the marshals escort him through the secure steel doors. The financial slaughter mirrored the criminal convictions. The morning following the gala, I authorized Elias Caldwell to execute the default clauses. We foreclosed on Bradley's toxic waterfront developments. We triggered the cross-collateralization covenants, legally seizing Warren's entire commercial reserve. The municipal banking boards realized my agricultural holding firm possessed the $50 million debt, and they immediately abandoned the Thorne dynasty to protect their own ledgers. Warren's commercial real estate firm filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The liquidators seized the assets, auctioning the office furniture, the executive vehicles, and the towering glass monolith to satisfy the remaining creditors. The ruin cascaded directly onto Sylvia and Clara. Without Warren's illicitly sourced capital, the municipal banks executed an immediate foreclosure on the sprawling family mansion. County sheriffs arrived on a Tuesday morning, physically hauling Sylvia's imported mahogany furniture, Clara's wedding porcelain, and their expensive designer luggage onto the public sidewalk. Sylvia attempted to weaponize her social network. She dialed dozens of country club elites, begging for a temporary loan or a guest house to occupy. Every single call routed directly to voicemail. The socialites who previously offered digital prayers for my fabricated mental collapse completely exiled my mother. Elite society possesses zero tolerance for convicted federal felons and bankrupt facades. Stripped of their stolen capital and their manufactured lineage, Sylvia and Clara plummeted into the brutal reality they spent their entire lives mocking. Today, Sylvia works a cash register at a massive, discount grocery retailer located on the desolate outskirts of the city. She wears a stiff, polyester uniform vest. She spends 8 hours a day scanning barcodes, bagging canned goods, and forced to offer polite smiles to managers who care absolutely nothing about her former country club status. Clara secures employment at a high-volume coffee franchise. The woman who demanded an antique emerald collar to command a ballroom now burns her manicured hands steaming milk. Returning to a cramped, unair-conditioned studio apartment she shares with her mother, they operate in absolute obscurity, trapped in the inescapable wreckage of their own unparalleled greed. I stood inside the primary cultivation sanctuary of Cross Agri-Tech. Sunlight poured through the reinforced glass ceiling, illuminating thousands of thriving, proprietary genetic hybrids. The environment smelled of damp loam, crushed jasmine, and unyielding growth. I held a silver pruning shear, carefully trimming the excess foliage from a drought-resistant cellular matrix. Nathaniel entered the greenhouse. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, carrying 2 ceramic mugs of dark coffee. He walked down the polished concrete aisle, navigating the flourishing empire we built together. He handed me a mug, his warm fingers brushing against mine. He looked out over the sprawling botanical laboratory, then turned his gaze entirely to me. He did not see a defective asset. He did not see a silent partner. He saw the architect. The global market officially absorbed the new agricultural patents this morning, Nathaniel noted, leaning against the stainless steel workstation. The initial public valuation exceeded $3 billion. We secured the perimeter. Ivy, the foundation is impenetrable. We planted the right seeds, I answered, setting the silver shears onto the metal table. I leaned into his solid frame, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my shoulder. I took a slow sip of the coffee, letting the heat center me. I looked at the thick roots digging deep into the nutrient-rich soil. I required no external validation. I required no manufactured applause. I possessed absolute peace, anchored by a partnership forged in mutual respect and undeniable merit. True power doesn't require arrogance or applause. It requires the quiet discipline to let toxic people build their own cages, and the strength to lock the door, if you've ever had to reclaim your worth from those who tried to erase you. Let me know in the comments below, and please like and subscribe for more stories of survival and justice.